The only thing that I knew that I enjoyed in life was training.
Yeah.
And everybody has an exercise science degree. I looked at how saturated that field was, and I didn't think that I could be a whole lot different. It's not that it doesn't matter, but it's that as long as you have the intensity behind it, that's what makes the difference. It's not as much the specific movement, it's having the intensity behind it.
There's others that are going to warm up slower, right? Because they want to try to build some work capacity.
I will take bigger jumps when I'm at the lower weights.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. It might just be plate.
All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Travis McKinney. He's, I want to say a 220-pound powerlifter, but you've been in several different weight classes. You currently hold the all-time world record, multiply squat at 1113. Been competing for like 15 years. We'll go through all that. I believe you started in 2007.
2010.
2010.
Yep.
Well, there's some high school things that were before that.
It started in 2010.
2010. So that was in 2010. You currently work as a coach of a high school powerlifting team. You've been in the Army Reserves, is that right?
Correct.
For 12 years?
It'll be 12 in April.
So in 12 years there, and have competed raw, single ply, and multiply. So as we move through this conversation, you know, all genres.
Yep.
Started in the USAPL. And we'll just kind of move forward through all that. Before we get into all this, I want to remind you guys to like the podcast, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review. And if you're really serious about your training, join the crew. That's in the description. Just click join the crew, help support the podcast, and we'll help you get stronger in your training, business, and life. So to jump back into this, to get into your timeline, your first meet, you were 15.
Correct.
Right?
It was the same week I turned 15.
How did that actually, before that, because this is something I'm really interested in, and you have a degree in nutrition.
Correct.
And your knowledge in exercise science is strong as well. So you'll kind of get where I'm going. Kids develop, there's certain developmental phases throughout adolescence or throughout being a child. You know, and a lot of kids today miss those phases, but they have for many generations too. So the same things that we're bitching about the kids today, it's been the same story for like 20 years. But I'm interested when speaking with top lifters and top athletes, because certain motor abilities like explosive strength, you know, not so much endurance but it not for a power lifter, but for other sports, isn't developed in those timeframes. So before junior high, what kind of sports were you associated with or at all?
Nothing serious.
Well, what do you mean by that?
I did soccer in kindergarten. Golf was somewhere in there, 4th grade maybe. 4th and 5th grade, I did wrestling. Then didn't really do anything else up until middle school. Middle school is when I took off with lifting.
Okay.
I got into lifting because I had a relative about the same age as me. He was a senior my freshman year of high school, so we were fairly close in age. Our school had a record board, had a middle school record board, and he had.
Now, what were the things they were tracking? Just squat, bench, and deadlift?
Squat, bench, deadlift, hang clean.
Okay.
Yep. And he had the squat record for one of the weight classes. It would have been like 142 or something, or whatever weight class they used. They didn't use the official powerlifting weight classes.
Yeah.
Actually, I think they combined male and female and just had every weight class there was. So
I can see that. Yeah.
But males could use the female weight classes, whatever. It was just every weight class.
Mm-hmm.
So he had one of the squat records, and when I was getting into middle school, I was about the same weight. One of the kids who was in between us in age, he was a football player, and the football coach loved him. The football coach ran the record board, did a glorified knee bend, broke the record by 5 or 10 pounds. And he came up to me one day as soon as it was broken and said, well, if I can't have it, you got to have it. So at 12 years old, I was in the gym squatting 4 days a week to try to get that record back.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I did. And I come to find out, so I was in 7th grade and it was a middle school record board, 7th and 8th grade. I was one of 3 that I know of. I was one of 3 middle schoolers that got on that record board as a 7th grader. Not very many people did that.
Do you know what was the lift? Can you remember what that was?
I got a 255 squat.
Okay.
At like 140 pounds.
Yeah.
So 13 years old, give or take. The record was 240. I think it got broken with 245, and then I had 255.
So then when you started competing at that time, was it in high school federations or was it in the USAPL?
Yep. So I didn't actually so that was when my training started.
Yeah.
I didn't compete until my freshman year. I did most of my training at 14, and then I had a birthday, and then that following weekend was the meet.
Okay.
So, and I still remember that meet. I had a 345 squat, 245 bench, 445 deadlift. 345, 245, 445 was super easy.
Yeah. So what inspired you to do that outside that? Because obviously it started with that record board.
Yep.
What did your school have a team?
We did not. So
fill in the gaps here.
I knew that I knew that competitions existed. I knew that they got a bunch of high school kids together. There were lifts, and people would just go see how strong they were against each other. That's all I knew. Wanted to give it a shot. I didn't know how to get into it, but there were the big guys in the gym, quote unquote. And so I went up to them and said, hey, I heard about these strength competitions. Do you guys know anything about them? And sure enough, one of them happened to be a WPC world record holder. He had a 600-pound deadlift at 148, about a 650 deadlift at 165. He had a couple world records at the time.
So you weren't training in the high school gym or the junior high gym. You were training in
our community fitness center. Was attached to the high school. So it was attached to the high school. That was the high school gym, but it was open to the public.
Okay. And who was this guy?
Gary Reichert was his name.
Yeah.
So, and we had our first crew. It was Gary kind of led the whole thing. There was a former bodybuilder, Eric, about 330 pounds, 6'4", probably the biggest guy anybody has seen in our small town. Kurt Flata was another one. Curtis was just an old lumberjack who liked to lift. We had a Pastor Dan. He enjoyed lifting with us. Derek Nelson was another one.
Were you the youngest?
Oh yeah. I mean, these are all guys who were. I think Derek was the second youngest at probably about 30 at the time. Gary would have been in his upper 40s. Kurt would have been upper 40s, early 50s, and then Eric would have been early 40s, 41 or 42-ish.
How did they welcome you at the time?
They said, as long as you're willing to show up at this time, we're willing to help you. And showing up at the same time 4 days a week whenever they were there went on for about 3 months, showing up at the same time, same days. And they finally invited me into the crew.
Okay.
Their little group. So that was my start. And then Gary was my first handler. He was my coach for the first 2 years.
Now, were you still playing? Were you still wrestling or doing any other sports at the time?
It was just lifting.
So it just all went into the powerlifting.
Correct.
And how are you then seen at school?
Nothing really changed.
Yeah.
I mean, whenever we had our weight room unit in gym class, I was the only one benching over a plate. I was the only one squatting over 2 plates. Depending on what time frame we're looking at, when we get into high school, I was the only freshman deadlifting 4 plates. There weren't really any seniors deadlifting over 4 plates. I mean, at the time, the biggest number on our record board was a 515 deadlift.
Yeah.
And that was done it was done on the hex bar. I think the guy weighed 270 pounds.
Yeah.
Something like that. I mean, there were a couple 300-pound hang cleans. I think the heaviest squat was 470-ish. That was the only 500-pound number, was that 515 hex bar deadlift.
Were I share a kind of similar story because I started when I was 14 and my training partners were all older. And then obviously you become stronger than everybody else in school because you're training. They're not. Did you have the silent whispers and the backlash of teachers saying that you're taking steroids and shit like that because you're stronger than everybody else?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, people joked about it, but I don't think anybody was serious.
Yeah. It
was just, oh, you're on steroids. It was a joke.
More
Nobody ever
joking
took it seriously.
around. Yeah. Okay.
I never took any offense to it.
Yeah. I had like sit downs with the principal and shit.
Oh yeah.
It was like, what the hell?
Nothing to that extent.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. No. I remember there was a big deal when kids started to take whey protein. None of the parents knew what it was. And mind you, we're talking 2010 is the time frame.
Yeah.
Anywhere between 07, 2011 is the time frame we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So fitness wasn't mainstream. CrossFit didn't come around until 2010 or 2012-ish, somewhere in that ballpark. So fitness wasn't even mainstream. The whole supplement industry was barely existent at that time, at least to my perception.
Yeah.
It's certainly not what it is now. So you get a kid that has a powder that he's putting in a shaker bottle. Nobody knows what it is. But that's
creatine is
right.
cocaine.
but that's the secret to getting strong is whatever powder they're putting in their drink.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, we have protein-based coffee creamers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after that first meet, were you hooked?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so what was your goal then? So you have that first meet. So was your goal immediately IPF Junior Worlds, or was your goal?
My goal was nationals.
Nationals.
Yep.
So the high school nationals.
And so that first meet, I hit the minimum qualifying total I need. Whatever those three numbers added up to.
Yeah.
I forget if it was 1035 or that might be what it was, 1035, I think. But I hit the minimum qualifying total I need, go to nationals. I got second place. It was a junior varsity category. So freshman, sophomore. I got second place next to a sophomore and I was a freshman. And it kind of clicked in my head then where I'm like, wait, if I'm just starting out and this was second at a national level competition, there might be something to this. Maybe I should pursue this a little bit. I certainly was never good at any of the other sports. Like we go to gym class and we play flag football or something. I was never the first one picked. Never good at dodgeball. I couldn't throw a ball. Still can barely throw a ball. Not good at any of the other sports, but lifting is what I took to. I forgot to add in there that in 8th grade, I did track. And after spending a good year and a half lifting, and I think in 8th grade, I had a 315 squat. Well, that correlated to the 100-meter dash pretty good.
Yeah.
And running in the low 13s in middle school, there weren't very many people doing that. I mean, there were. I wasn't the fastest one.
Yeah.
But I was always like top 3 in the races.
Well, it's funny how that happens, right?
Yeah.
You get stronger, you get faster. We'll talk about that with the teens that you work with now, but it's surprising to me how many coaches still haven't figured that thing out, where it's so freaking obvious. So each year became the winning the nationals, right?
Yep.
So then winning the nationals, then repeating, and then moving through. That was pretty much your whole high school sport journey.
For the most part.
Yeah.
Junior, senior year, I did not want to go through high school without experiencing what football was like.
Yeah.
So I joined football my junior and senior year. I didn't have the time in football that everybody else did. Everybody else had 10 years in playing football by the time they were seniors. So I didn't know what the plays were. I wasn't smart enough to be on the offense. So they just put me on defense. And I asked them, I said, just point blank, what is the goal of defense? And they put me on the line. And they just said, get the ball. Like, I can do that.
Yeah.
So got on the line, popped up, and then I could get to the quarterback.
Yeah.
It made it pretty simple when they broke it down that easily. Just get to the ball. Wherever the ball is, you run after the ball. Cool. I can be a caveman. I can get to the ball.
Yeah.
I tried playing. I wanted to go linebacker, and they said I wasn't fast enough for linebacker. I still remember I ran a 4.9, and I went to state track twice. Out junior year, I was backup for a relay, but we still went to track. I was still in a 4-man relay, I was the 5th fastest on the team for that race. It was the 4x4. So they said I wasn't fast enough, but I tied the fastest receiver for their 40-yard time. But they kept me on the line. I was a left D tackle.
So how did you periodize your training to be able to go along with football? Because I'm going to guess powerlifting was still the highest priority.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. So when it came to 2-a-days or 2-a-days, right? Yep. So that's going to screw the train, because I did the same shit. So that's going to screw it up.
They actually went away from 2-a-days.
Oh, did they?
They did.
Okay.
We had one 5-hour practice.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah.
All right. That helps a lot. But during the season, how did you navigate your powerlifting training?
I listened to my body quite a bit. I didn't have a dedicated process. Though being 17, 18 years old, you're not exposed to a whole lot when it comes to training and periodizing. Now maybe the kids are, but
well,
but
you're
we
also
weren't
with
back
a
then.
crew though too. That I'm sure there were designated days.
So they moved away.
Okay.
I was only with the crew my freshman and sophomore year.
Yeah.
And they brought me through nationals my sophomore year, and like every other gym, it's a community fitness center, and they're trying to deadlift 500 or 600 pounds. They're trying to squat the same. The old people don't like hearing the weights clanging. When you got somebody doing a 500-pound floor press or pin press and plates are banging, the old people are going to complain. So they just went and bought their own equipment, put it in a little shack, and they started training on their own. I stayed at the high school. At the time, it wasn't really feasible for me to go over where they were training at. So I started training on my own the end of my sophomore year of high school.
Okay.
That was kind of when my independent journey started. Now, to answer the question about football, to answer that question, I just listened to my body. So I knew that I put 2 and 2 together, that if I'm doing these long practices, now the 5-hour practices were only in the summer. During the school year, it was down to 2.5 or 3 hours. We were still running quite a bit. And at that time I had joined the National Guard. So I had to maintain my 2-mile run. I had to get that down. Whenever I would squat heavy, I put 2 and 2 together that a heavy squat and a 2-mile run in the same week didn't work. Yeah. So I had to reduce my squatting volume if it was getting to be time to pick up the running, and then vice versa. When running went down, then I could pick the squatting up. So it was just a little bit of auto regulation, but there wasn't really a rhyme or reason to it. It was whatever that first target was, whatever was the closest goal. If I had to run the next weekend, I wasn't squatting that week.
When did the nationals typically fall? In the spring? March. So that you're cool with that, because everything else would be done unless you made it to like playoffs or something. And even that still wasn't in that much.
The high school, our high school football season was completely done by the first weekend of November. Okay. Like that was when our state was. And we never made it to state. So we were usually done in October if we made it to playoffs.
Now, after that crew dispersed, and you have to start trying to figure the training out for yourself, how did you go about doing that? And how were you training then?
So they were very open that their style of training reflected Ed Cohn.
So linear based.
Pretty much. Yeah. It was very much Ed Cohn style. And I had learned enough through them that I knew that your lats and your hamstrings were pretty important. So I would just fell back on that. It was lats and hamstrings were my go-to. If I didn't know what to do, it was usually a cable row or a pull down or something. But at that age, at 17 or 18 years old, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter what you do, but as long as there's a high amount of intensity, you're going to make progress. So
yeah, but there's still resources online that can go down a ton of different rabbit holes. And if you're new to it and you love it and you have a passion for it, there's more rabbit holes now because the social media is more popular than it was then, but they're still there.
So at that time, after I actually scheduled my school classes around what I wanted to do for lifting. So if I knew that I was going to be picking up lifting in the evening that semester, I had 2 study halls my senior year. So I made sure I didn't have homework after school. Like I paid attention in school and I did my study halls, used my study halls. Yeah. I didn't have homework after school very often. Utilized my school time. So whenever I got home from school, I would go lift from 3:30 to 5:30. If there was a sport practice, then it was practice until 5:30. And then I would lift from 6 to 9. And then from about 9 to 11, I was on T Nation, bodybuilding.com, the early eras of the YouTube fitfluencers. I remember there was one, and he kind of died off now, but it was like Scooby's Workshop or something.
The brim hat.
Yeah. And so I learned a bunch of stuff through him, but he was more wellness. He was just more like just get in shape, wellness kind of stuff. And there was a forum on there that was just kind of fun to contribute to. But at 17 years old, I didn't know what I was saying. So then anytime I would comment something, I would have like 3 people coming back. No, you're wrong. Well, if I'm wrong, why am I wrong? So then I would go look up, okay, well, this is what I think. And I would try to put 2 and 2 together, try to find an answer to you. This is what I believe. Is it accurate or is it not? Well, that's where bodybuilding.com and T Nation comes in, but there weren't very many answers on the internet. And at 18, I didn't understand how to decipher good from bad on the internet.
So what, you just relied on what was working for you?
Pretty much. I would read something and then I would try to, if it looked like it had some legitimacy, I would try to go apply it. And if I found any kind of progress, or if it, for lack of a better term, if it felt right, then I might take it and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that was always accurate.
Yeah.
It was just anecdotal.
It's still, it's a trial error process.
Yep.
That you're going through.
Yes.
Right. And so then going back to the National Guard, what prompted you to do that, to enlist? Because
I knew, to be blunt about it, I knew that if I wanted to go to college, my parents weren't going to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to figure out a way to pay for it myself. And looking into how much debt people go into with college, that didn't appeal to me either. So I wanted the government to pay for it.
Yeah.
That was how I could get the government to pay for it. That was what I had to do. They paid, I got a GI Bill stipend from it. So the place that I lived in was it had the cheapest rent in the state, one of the cheapest. I think for a 2-bedroom apartment, it was $625 that I stayed in for 4 years. The landlord was pretty cool, so he never bumped my rent up. As long as I re-upped the lease, it was good.
Why? Most kids that age aren't thinking shit through like that.
Right.
So why were you thinking things through like that? What made you different than most other kids? Most other kids aren't thinking shit like that.
That's just how I thought.
Yeah.
I don't really have an answer to.
Do you know why you wanted to go to college then? Fucking most kids don't even know that until they're like seniors or juniors.
Because everybody always told me that if you want to make money, you got to go to college.
Yeah.
That's all I knew, is just a college degree equals an income.
Yeah.
Might not be totally true, but that's what we were told.
That's what you were told,
yeah.
Right? That dialogue has just started to change a few years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So prices have changed too.
About the time I graduated, conveniently.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the costs have gone up a lot.
Yep.
Because I was able to pay for my college while I was in college. Yep. Doing several different jobs, but it was I couldn't do it now. There would have to be some kind of other aid because of that. So when you graduate, then did you know that you wanted to go into the nutrition side, or did you exercise? When you went into college, did you kind of know what you wanted to do?
So my thought process was, the only thing that I knew that I enjoyed in life was training.
Yeah.
And everybody has an exercise science degree. I looked at how saturated that field was, and I didn't think that I could be a whole lot different. Or I saw what the metrics were. I looked at how many people graduated with exercise science degrees. And if I wanted to go into some kind of coaching or training, what's going to set me aside with just that as my degree? So then I go in and I'm like, okay, well, there's 2 sides to it. You have the exercise side in the weight room, and then you have the nutrition side that you're at home in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm. So
if everybody's pursuing the weights, I'm going to go pursue the other side to it. And that should set me apart.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that I went that route. Given those 2 options, I'm glad that I picked the nutrition route. But looking back, I probably would go for computer science.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why sociology as the minor?
I needed a GPA booster. If I'm being 100% honest.
No, I get it. No, go ahead.
We had a minimum GPA in order to stay in our major, and we needed a 2.75. I was at a 2.76, and I was asking around campus, what are the participation degrees?
Mm-hmm.
I said, I just want something where I can show up. Let me show up to class. Not a whole lot of exams, not a whole lot of homework. And everybody said sociology.
Well, the reason I'm laughing is my journey through college was a little patched, right? So I go through a small school, take college I was supposed to take in high school because I didn't take in high school, so they didn't count for college credit. So I transferred to a bigger university, which was Bowling Green. Then I flunked out the first quarter, right? And then I don't want to retake those courses ever again, right? Because I flunked out. But I had a 0.75 grade average. And I also didn't want to stay in that school any longer, but I couldn't transfer because I had a 0.75 grade average. So I needed a 2.5. So I ditched everything as far as what I actually wanted to do, were what people suggested I do. And I would just walk through the bookstore and find the books that were interesting to me, that looked like it wouldn't be that hard to actually take the class. And then 4 years later, when we start, I have enough credit hours to graduate, but I have no idea what I'm fucking doing. I'm just taking random courses. And I was one class away from a sociology. That's why I'm laughing, right? Because I was basically just picking courses that I knew wouldn't be that hard, that I could still focus on powerlifting and everything I really wanted to do.
Yep.
And wouldn't have to like cram and do all this other kind of shit for that. And it's, I never thought of it from the standpoint of I was just taking the easiest shit I could find. You know, it just was interesting, like deviant sexual behavior. Yep. Looks good to me.
So it was funny. A lot of the courses I took were sociology of medicine, which how do people interact in a hospital setting? And sociology being how people interact with each other. I took marriage and the family, which talks about the whole family setup. Sociology theory. So now we go into like Marxism.
I took all this.
Yeah. Going in through all that, going through the sociology program, needed that GPA booster. I can now say that I have a degree in social justice warrior.
Yeah. Well, at least you can see it. You know what I'm saying? So I will say that much though, that it allowed me to be able to see things more from a social perspective.
Yep.
You know, and how even like training crews. You know, it's the way we may see a training crew and how it operates maybe differently than somebody else would, because we're going to see all the other factors that kind of play into that, especially if they're all coming from different backgrounds, different areas of town, different people, and they're forced to kind of work together, you know, which kind of sucks that training crews aren't like they used to be, you know, because that doesn't happen so much anymore.
It does not.
Now it's all cliquey, right? So from that social perspective, is this good? You know, or is it bad? You know, I don't think it's good, you know, because they should learn how to work, you know, together and so forth. But anyhow, we can go down that rabbit hole. And so the master's then, why that?
So I graduated with my dietetics degree from UW Stevens Point in December 2019. I told myself that if I couldn't find a job by July 2020, then I was going to go on and pursue a graduate degree. And it was always in the back of my head that I wanted to get an advanced degree. Nobody in my family's ever done it before, and so I would be the first. I was also looking for every excuse not to do that because I didn't want to be in school anymore. And for the folks that are not keeping track at home, I graduated December 2019. July 2020 was my deadline, and the whole world shut down March 2020. So every company went on a hiring freeze. I couldn't find a job by July 2020. So I signed up for fall classes in July. I signed up for those fall classes, started in September. With COVID and everything being shut down, everything got moved to online. I was able to do all of my courses except for one online. Now the university was 3.5 hours away, so thank God for that. Thank God everything was online. It was still considered an in-person degree, and that one class that I had to go in person for, I was able to get waived because I had enough undergraduate credits that transferred up.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So that worked out perfect.
Yeah. So it was a 100% online virtual degree, even though it was listed in person.
Yes. What year did you get to? I got it written down here, but I don't want to put my glasses on. Did you get to the IPF Junior Worlds? 2013?
That was 2013.
2013.
So I was invited to the IPF 4 separate times. Junior and senior year, 2012, 2013. I was invited to bench only and 3 lift worlds both times, but they were both, all of them were abroad except for the 3 lift worlds that I did attend. That was Killeen, Texas. But I mean, we weren't able to afford traveling over. And trying to fundraise to make that whole thing trying to make that trip, you're trying to get about $5,000, and our school didn't recognize the team, or the school didn't have a team. I was the only one. So trying to explain to people that, hey, this is a really cool thing, this is a big deal, to try to raise that much money in a small town probably wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, but what was the experience like for you personally to do it and to go there and compete? Yeah.
It was the coolest thing. I'll say that at the time, the USAPL, they had a really cool setup where they rented out a block of hotel rooms we were in some kind of resort, and they rented a block of rooms, and they had a central room for the entire team. So every evening there were a couple moms that got together and cooked dinner for all the juniors and sub juniors. So we all got together, we all had dinner as a team, the 20 some of us, 20, 30 some of us. We all got to hang out. It was pretty much free range for that whole week, just a bunch of kids hanging out together, for better or for worse.
How many countries do you think were there?
Probably 30-ish. I mean, depends on how you look at it. How many competitive countries, or how many countries had representation?
Representation.
Yeah, because I think like Egypt had a super heavyweight with a 1,200 pound total or something like one of those Middle Eastern countries. There were people there who, if they were in any other country, they wouldn't have qualified for, but now the country had representation.
Yeah.
But as far as
there's a lot of people there.
Yeah.
How deep was your class?
Honestly, I think we had about 6 or 8.
Okay.
Yeah, probably about 6 or 8-ish. And I had, get this, I had a gold. I got the highest bench, the highest deadlift, and the second highest total, and the second highest squat. I got my opener squat at 600.
What class was this?
The 93s.
Okay.
So that was 205. I weighed in at like 197, I believe. I had a 600 pound opening squat, missed my next 2. And there was a Russian who got all 3 and finished with a 350 kilo squat at 18 years old. Was that like 777, I believe? Yeah. I wasn't going to come back from that.
Yeah. No shit.
But we still finished about 30 pounds apart from each other. And a month prior, I had done a UPA meet. And I mean, so Monolift didn't walk it out, but I used the same equipment. There were no briefs, 2-meter wraps, all IPF approved equipment. And I had totaled, it was 1862 the month prior. That was July. 1862. I had a 1780 total. And the guy that beat me had like an 1830. So a month prior, I out totaled them.
Yeah.
I wasn't happy.
Well, that's in nature.
And I got second place best lifter at IPF Worlds, behind the guy that beat me.
What do you mean second place best lifter? They had
so their best lifter category, like their formula, they gave awards to the top 3.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Then was it after that you decided to leave the USAPL or IPF affiliate?
So the guy that got me started, he was a WPC lifter, APF WPC, and I got to experience the UPA. I saw the monolifts. I saw everybody in multiply, and that looked to be a lot more fun. But the USAPL is where I was able to go compete at higher level competitions. The entire time that I was doing it, I hated walking out my squats. I hated keeping my heels on the floor. I hated having to keep my head on the bench, which they've eradicated that rule now. I hated all the brand recognition. You had to have a singular brand or whatever. I hated all the monotonous rules that the IPF enforced. I was looking forward to getting out of that federation from the time that I started.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. Because sometimes it's because I'm not really big into the federation bashing, because I think they all serve a purpose, and they're all powerlifters, and sometimes the bashing is just stupid.
It is.
But a lot of times, what I think a lot of lifters forget is for a lot of lifters, how they come in is usually how they stay.
Yes.
Like, so if they come in the USAPL, then they just stay USAPL and IPF, or they come in APF or whatever it is. The only ones where it moves around a lot be like SPF, UPA, the ones that I don't want to say don't count, but you know what I'm talking about. A smaller population, but whatever, that's genre, right? So whatever genre, single ply, drug tested, not drug tested, whatever it is typically where somebody stays for their whole career. I rarely hear somebody say that they started in a certain way and like they hated it, didn't hate it, but they didn't like a lot of things about it right from the jump.
I always struggled with walking out my squats.
Yeah.
And I always favored a wider stance. So walking out, trying to get that wide stance didn't work.
Yeah.
So I lost a lot of pounds in my squat just because of that. The monolift made a huge difference. I really enjoyed competing in the UPA back when I did it. And I still have nothing against them now. I think they're a little more raw than what I've heard, that they're a little bit more raw and a little tough on the multiply, just because the judges aren't used to looking at multiply squats.
Yeah.
But from the time that I got into the USAPL, I really just didn't like the enforcement of the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys that came before me were complaining about the same thing that I was experiencing. And coaching the high school team now, the kids are now complaining about the same thing that I complained about, which came before me and very likely came before them. Nothing's changed.
Now with your, it's going to kind of be on the same topic, but a little different. Now with the kids that you're working with, would you prefer they stay in the USAPL for the positives that it offers, drug testing, you know, and let's just say standards, you know, I don't want to say tighter standards, but more consistent standards. That might be a better way to kind of put it, you know, with the lifting across the board, or have them go into different random federations. Keep in mind they're high school kids.
Right. So I don't personally care what they do.
Yeah.
We compete with the USAPL because that's what the high school organization recognizes. It's the WHSPA, Wisconsin High School Powerlifting Association, and the WHSPA adopts USAPL rules. Now, for the first time, they're adopting a second state level meet with Powerlifting America to allow an IPF affiliate for the high school kids. I personally don't care what the kids do. They can make their own decisions. A lot of them choose to stay with the USAPL. As far as the exposure to the untested side, because even though they have in the APF, you have the AAPF and the APF, but they run simultaneously. And so now if you get the kids going to the AAPF, now they're going to be they will be exposed to people who are on.
Yes.
As long as they understand that they're not going to be touching any of that, and they're not going to be competing against people who touch that kind of stuff.
Well, I think in the other federations too, you lose a little bit the kids, right? I want to state that, right? Because if we're talking open lifters, my view changes substantially, you know, but you're talking the kids and the other federations, they lose that low hanging fruit. Like I want to qualify and go to state, right? Because there's a total they got to hit, you know, to be able to do that. It's kind of like you want to qualify for nationals, you know, and kind of go there, and those are more achievable goals than I want to try and make it to the WPO and get a pro total.
So this circles back to informed decisions.
Yes.
As long as they understand that the other federations don't offer as high of or as populated state level meets as what the USAPL offers, as long as they understand that they will probably see things that they're not going to, that they probably shouldn't, that's fine. As long as they have all the information to make the decision on their own. That's my big thing, is the informed decision.
Well, if you're the coach of them, you don't also want to have to go to 8 different meets in one training cycle.
Oh, we don't even have the option. It's a school sport. It's sanctioned by the school.
Got it. Yep. So is the school picking what meets they're going to do?
So the way the association is set up, we have regions within the state. I think there's 6 regions. We're region 4. And within each region, there's 3 to 4 meets. And so we go and attend each meet within our region. It is set up just like high school football or every other sport.
Got it.
So within football, you have your division. Or region and then divisions or something. Or a conference. That's what it is.
Conference.
Yep. So it's the exact same thing, just different words. We don't have to travel more than an hour and a half. But as far as the school goes, we stick within our school sanction, and that's it.
Okay.
And as far as what the kids do outside of high school, that's on them.
Okay.
And a lot of them choose to compete collegiately.
All right. So then moving through your timeline was, so there's 2020, and then was 2021 or 2022 your first WPO?
2022 was the first WPO.
Okay. And how'd that go?
I think it went good. I got second.
Why?
It's a second place meet, let's be honest. So in 2020, so mind you, I'd been competing since 2010. I had just been going into the gym and just lifting. And I would write the perfect training cycle. I would try to get everything perfect, straight across the board to the best of my ability. And training cycles never really panned out. And I liked the equipment, so I stuck with single ply for quite a while. But then I go to college and I'm training out of a YMCA. And trying to find people to lift off on a Magnum bench, Yeah. Trying to get people to lift off on commercial benches in a bench shirt doesn't work.
Yeah, with a deep J cups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. So I lost the ability to compete in equipment while I was in college until I took out a student loan and an extra student loan and bought a home gym.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole nother thing.
Mm-hmm.
So then I switched over to raw, and I wanted to compete as high as I could raw. And I saw the Arnold as a very fun competition. The XPC Arnold was a very fun competition. You go to the Arnold, who's going to hate that? That was where, in order to focus on my studies, I kept the Arnold as my one meet a year. Then as soon as I got out of college, I moved where I live now, over in Appleton. And I went to a gym where we had a lot of autonomy. We could bring our own equipment in. The owner never really showed up. It was just there. Like, the gym was just there.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a whole lot of attention put to it. So the members kind of ran the place. I could bring my own equipment in and train the way that I wanted to. I had a buddy that was a welder, and he made band pegs that could slide in between the holes of the squat rack.
Mm-hmm.
So we were finally able to train an equipment there using the Rogue mono hooks. That was pretty cool. Going back to you had asked about the WPO.
Yeah.
I was going to lead into something I forgot.
Well, it's where I'm going with this is a certain period of time. You're following your normal training program philosophy. Let's just put it that way, up to a certain point, and then everybody's going to get to a certain point where that just doesn't work the way that you want it to work. So then you got to figure some other shit out.
That's where I was going to lead into.
Yeah. So it seems like that happened right before these WPO times.
Yeah. So I got when I finished college and got to where I was going to be, where I am now. That's when I had the autonomy to train the way that I wanted to. We actually had people in the gym. We had lifters in the gym, so I could get spots. I could design the training how I wanted to. In 2020, when we were all locked at home, most people just sat home and played video games a lot. And I mean, that sounds like a lot of fun, but I took that opportunity to learn about how to actually program. Because with all the perfect training cycles that I wrote, I can't count how many perfect cycles that I wrote that never played out, never worked out. One of my buddies started following the West Side programming quite a bit. He read Book of Methods and started lifting the way that Louis was talking about, and his numbers skyrocketed within like 3 or 4 months. Like, it was a very short period of time. And I thought, okay, well, West Side has a reputation. They've been around forever. Louis talked about everywhere. I've never read his stuff. I don't know anything about it. The 9 months that we were locked down for COVID, it was all I listened to every West Side podcast twice. I bought the Book of Methods, and I did as much studying as I could on West Side, like the 2007 Book of Methods. As much studying as I could. That is what got my lifting to really go up. Learning how to program based on what Louis had said. And I attribute pretty much all of my equipped success to what Louis had said. So leading into the WPO, I had 2 years of training. I mean, it wasn't under Louis' guidance, but it was under his words.
Yeah.
One of the big things that really resonated with me, and it took about 4 or 5 times in his podcast of him saying it before it really resonated, was they had figured out what they were going to do that day, that morning at Bob Evans over breakfast, and whoever had the biggest total at the last meet figured out what they were going to do. And I'm like, and it kind of hit me. I'm like, it's not that it doesn't matter, but it's that as long as you have the intensity behind it, that's what makes the difference. It's not as much the specific movement, it's having the intensity behind it. Because if it was the movement, then you would have planned it out weeks ahead of time and had everything all stacked up.
Yes.
But that's not how they did it. So I decided to figure out what I was going to do that day when I walked into the gym. I didn't even think about it until I walked through the doors of the gym. That's when I figured it out. And the safety bar, box squat, briefs, sleeves, and band against bands has been what has blown up my squat. As long as I keep that movement in more times than not, my squat goes up.
So when you first laid it out, What did the days look like? Were they identical? Like Monday's max effort lower body, Wednesday's max effort upper body, or did you have it laid out on a microcycle? So the week, did you have the training week weight laid out exactly the same, or was it different?
So without having to heavily rely on other people's schedules, it was whatever. I still had the max effort, dynamic effort, dynamic effort. I still had the 4-day split. And then sometimes I would add a 5th day in there for accessory movements only if I got lazy during the week. But since I didn't have to rely on anybody else's schedule, it was whatever worked out that day. Now I would space them out. I wouldn't do a max effort squat then dynamic effort squat the next day. I still made sure I had at least 48 to 72 hours break in between. But no, I didn't follow max effort Monday, dynamic effort Tuesday every single week.
So then why would it change? Because you needed more recovery or work? Or what would change those variables? Or what would change what day?
Usually outside factors. If it was one of those, like if I had a drill weekend and we had to go do a ruck march that weekend, I wasn't going to go do max effort lower on that following Monday.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of outside factors. If I didn't sleep well that night and maybe I got 2 hours of sleep and it was a busy day, that might be a dynamic effort upper. As long as I didn't do dynamic effort the day prior, or maybe even 2 days prior, that might have been what it was. Or it would be an accessory day even.
And you started it that way.
Started the week that way?
No. When you first started doing conjugate or the West Side conjugate, that's how you started it, or did you start it as it's laid out in the book?
I made my best attempt to start it the way that it was laid out, but I quickly realized that with real life schedules, that wasn't realistic to maintain week after week after week without deviation.
Yes.
There was always going to be some kind of a deviation.
Okay. And then you kind of noted what those were, if the sleep shitty, or if you had the rucks and all the other stuff to be able to move that in there. So if you moved that, was it just changing a day, or would it actually push into that next week? For instance, if Monday's max effort, does it just then become Tuesday, but then Wednesday stays your normal? Or does that Tuesday move all the other days too?
It would probably move all the other days.
Okay.
This is the outlier. It's an exception, but sometimes I might just have to skip a workout. Might just have to skip it. So let's say there have been times that we've had a Monday, Tuesday drill. And if it's a Monday, Tuesday drill, well, I'm skipping lifting Monday and Tuesday. And so Wednesday is probably not going to be that max effort lower. I could be a dynamic effort upper, but now my training is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I'm not doing 2 true max efforts, with no break.
Yeah. So if one of the 2 had to be taken out for a reason like that, if it's the max effort or the dynamic effort, which one are you going to pull out and which one are you going to keep? Which one do you think has the most benefit for you?
Everything's situational, but everything's situational. Like I don't have a cut and dry answer.
Yeah.
Usually max effort upper or dynamic effort upper, that would be one that might get skipped.
Yeah.
And I'm now seeing that I probably need to add that back in a little bit more often. More times than not, it might just turn into an accessory day. Now, rather than staying true to max effort, dynamic effort, it might just be an accessory day. It might be an upper body accessory day.
Yeah.
And so then we could call that a repetition effort day.
All right. So let's go back to the max effort day. If it's a max effort lower day and it's happening, right?
Yeah.
So you're going in to do that, then what does that day look like? So you're going to figure the movement out when you get there, or you're going to have some kind of, maybe some off idea of what it's going to be, but that could change.
Yep.
Right. So then how do you execute that movement? And then what happens after that movement? So
let's say it's, so if we're doing a max effort upper or max effort lower, lower. If we're doing a max effort lower, because I don't have access to a full training crew, a consistent full training crew, more times than not, it's going to be a box squat with briefs and sleeves. And then I try to maximize whatever the weight is at the top. So band tension, I don't have access to chains right now. At home I do, but I haven't brought them to the gym. and I've only got like 150 pounds.
Yeah. So that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's usually trying to maximize whatever weight's at the top on the band tension. I've found that for me, the safety bar has the highest correlation to what my straight bar squat is. So how that day would look, I would just work my way up and see whatever I can get. Now I'd make an intelligent jumps. I prefer a little bit of a smaller jump, bigger jumps for the warm-ups. And then once I get closer to that heavier weight, I'm not making 80 or 90 pound jumps. It might be 40 pound jumps.
Okay. So as you're working up to this, because this this gets overlooked sometimes. So there's some that will use max effort that just want to get up there as fast as they can.
Mhm.
So 5 warm up, whatever it takes just to warm up to actually hit it, because that's the thing that matters the most. There's others that are going to warm up slower, right? Because they want to try to build some work capacity between like the 70% range and say the 90% range on doubles or triples.
Yep.
So that actually becomes part of the workload for that day. So where do you fall with those? Is it just get up there and hit what you need to hit, or build that work capacity as you're working up? Granted, you become acclimated to either.
Yeah. I almost want to say a happy medium,
Mhm.
because I will take bigger jumps when I'm at the lower weights.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I-
Well,
I-
yeah.
Yeah. It might just be plate,
Yeah.
all the way up until about 800, eight or even, well, depending on what equipment I'm wearing. But it might be just plate all the way up to 800. And then maybe I go 840, 880, or I might hit 860, 920. It kind of depends on the day. It really depends on the day.
Okay.
And I could even backtrack a little bit. Back when I was making the perfect training cycles, this will kind of clear things up a little bit. Back when I made, and what my opinion was, the perfect training cycle that never played out.
Mm-hmm.
Coupling with Louis' talk about, we figured everything out the day of. I switched that over, figured everything out what it was the day of. I became very relaxed with my training. I'm very methodical about how I set up and what exercises I do, but that's all determined the day of.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't written out a training cycle in about 3 years. And I feel like the flexibility in each given day has really skyrocketed my total.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not regimented about, I said 3 weeks ago I have to do lat pull downs with this sets, this reps, these
Mhm.
sets and these reps. No, it's what I feel like I need that given day. So my jumps might be dictated a little bit differently depending on what I need for that day. If I feel that I need a little bit more warming up, I might take more jumps up.
Mm-hmm.
I might take 400 for two sets. But once I get to that heavier weight, I do feel like I need a little bit of a smaller jump.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to take plate after 700 or 800, or after 800 maybe. I'll drop down to 60 pounds. And then, for example, when I hit my heaviest squat this training cycle, it was a 45-pound jump from my last set to my heaviest set. That was about a 45-pound jump. For bench, it might be, I'm trying to think, 40 to 60. I mean, 40 to 60 is a pretty safe jump, pretty safe bet. If we want to make a one size fits all, 40 to 60 is about what I do for my heavier jumps.
Okay. From speaking to you over the weekend, the way I define what you're talking about is you ought to regulate everything.
Yes.
Which I think that the only way any lifter can ever become great is to learn how to auto regulate.
Yeah.
It kind of rhymes, but everything.
Yeah.
Right. So as I go through this training day, because now what I could ask is, well, what do you do after that? And you're going to say, well, it depends on how that feels. Right. So I'm going to give you scenarios.
Okay.
Okay. So you do that in, so let's say it's a 5-pound PR, right?
Yep.
But it's fucking hard, like super hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like you had to grind your ass off to be able to do that. Then what precedes that?
What perceives that is,
So keep in mind it was hard as fuck.
Yep.
Okay.
So what
will follow that movement on that day?
What follows that is,
in that situation,
sitting on my phone and looking at that video and figuring out where that weak point is in that movement.
Mm-hmm.
So if we take a shirted bench, for example, and I grind it out at the top, it depends. did my elbows flare at the bottom when they shouldn't have? And if so, maybe I need a little more upper back work to keep my elbows tight at that lower position. If it was, and that would go back into a form thing, something form related. That's
Mhm.
why I grinded it out. Maybe I need some more upper back work, keep the elbows tight at the bottom. In which case, I might keep the shirt on and do, if we're saying I just hit an 850 bench,
Yeah.
and I might drop down to 716 for doubles and triples, or maybe even 650 and see if I can touch it for doubles and triples, and really focus on keeping my form tight in that bottom position, and then go into some upper back work.
Okay.
And that specific upper back movement is gonna change. If I just hit lat pull downs the last 3 weeks, maybe I'll do dumbbell rows. Just something different.
Yes.
But if I miss it at the top and if I get it, it's slow and it's a real grinder at the top, but form stayed good, that's a good indicator that maybe it's triceps. Maybe I need to put a little bit more emphasis on that meat right around the elbow. Then I can figure out, what do I need? Well, decline dumbbell rollbacks have been a tried and true bread and butter for me. And so I could push those, but if my training has already pushed those for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I feel that I've put a lot of effort into those, maybe I'll start doing, and I get a lot of my tricep stuff from Jimmy Kolb, maybe I'll do one-arm cable press downs, or maybe I'll do dumbbell press with a neutral or even almost underhand grip to put a little more effort into the triceps. Maybe my dynamic effort days turn into reverse grip bench against bands.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely situational depending on where that weak point is during the lift.
Yes.
It's always, my philosophy in training is to attack the weakest point. If I can continuously bring up the weakest point of that lift, theoretically, the strongest point just goes up.
So it's in that case of that max effort day, that in that case, that weak point's being addressed immediately.
Correct.
Right. And then after that, what would fall after that?
The following days, or
no, that same day, when you fall back into just like basic accessory shit. So then what would fall after that?
So I mean, there's a couple muscle groups that I have that always just stay in.
Mm-hmm.
So I always tell the kids that it's triceps, belly, butt, lats.
Mm-hmm.
You can never do enough triceps. You can never do enough lats. You can never do enough abs. You can never work your glutes enough. So usually it's going to fall back into one of those 4 muscle groups. But again, it also depends on what I've been doing. If I haven't hit shoulders in a while, maybe I'm going to hit shoulders a little bit. Everything is situational. All my entire training is situational, and it's really hard to put a one size fits all on anything.
Yeah. I think we can get close, right? So let's go back to this lift again.
Yep.
Okay. And now it's not a grinder.
Okay.
But there's still not, there's not really another jump that you could make, or there's really not a need to make another jump. Mm-hmm. And then you look at it, and then technically it's good. Yeah. It's solid. Then what's going to be the second focus, or the second thing you're going to roll into? So
we're just going to use bench press, for example.
Yeah.
Let's use bench. And I hit I'd say for the kids at home, an RPE 9, it was a heavy set, and I'm happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's 95%, something like that. I'm happy with it. Everything stays good. Then I'll take the shirt off, and I'll do usually a raw narrow grip variation. And that'll be for reps. That'll be 10s, 12s. Usually I'll finish with some AMRAP of something. A couple weeks ago, I did to one of the, I forget what it's called. That thing right there, shoulder saver.
Yeah.
I put one of those on the bar and did 275 for a set of 22 narrow grip. It's just going to be getting blood flow. Getting out of the shirt, it's going to be blood flow work, which I define as typically a narrow grip high rep.
Mm-hmm.
Then I go on and do my accessory movements. Typically, it'll be bench, blood flow, some sort of a dumbbell press, whether it's an incline, an overhead, flat bench. Maybe I keep a hammer grip. Lots of variations for dumbbell presses. Then some sort of upper back work. Then something a tricep isolation movement.
All right. Now, when you're dealing with the lower end of the training day, so after the weak points have been addressed, but more of the bodybuilding stuff, how do you execute those movements? Do you execute them with force, or are you controlling the tempo? In other words, you can make 150-pound dumbbells for 10, right? Or you could use 100s with a slower tempo and, and fail at 10. Where do you fall with that, with those lower end things?
If I just got out of the shirt, it's going to be high rep stuff. If it's more off season, not in meat prep, or even.
But how's it being executed? The dumbbell presses, is it being executed explosively, or is it being executed with a slower eccentric? In other words, are you training it like a bodybuilder, or are you training it for strength?
Typically it'll be more explosive, but using dumbbell press for the example, it's typically going to be explosive.
Yeah.
But if I notice that my elbows are flaring out a little too much, or if form deviates, then I'll go a little bit more tempo. But that tempo is just going to be a 1 to 2 second, like 1.5 second down, 1.5 second up. So it's not a true tempo in the like 3 seconds down, 3 seconds. It's not a true like slow and controlled rep, but I control the rep more.
Okay.
And so by controlling it more, you have to naturally slow it down. So that'll be like a 1.5 second press.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do everything, and this is very recent, like in the last 2 weeks. There's a video on my Instagram where I just talked about it actually. But I used to have been doing everything explosively. But after I started recording some of my accessories, and I don't post everything, but after I recorded some of my accessories, I realized that I do have these minor deviations when I do things explosively. So now I need to slow things down, bring that form back to, as quote unquote perfect form as possible, bring it as close to perfect as possible. And then I'll work my way back up and only be as explosive as my form will allow.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Well, that's where I was getting with that is if it's a lower end accessory, some people are going to train that just say straight for hypertrophy.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, so, and the lower weight is going to be less wear and tear on the joints, side raises, for example, shit like that. You don't need to use 70-pound side raises, but some will, right? Some will heave them up because they want to try to drive that number as high as they possibly can. So with lifters, people fall on one or the other side of the spectrum. Some blend both. The smart ones will probably blend both, right?
Yeah.
Depending upon what the movement is and what you're trying to get out of the movement, and so that without that weak point there, that sounds like that's what your default day is for the bench. Like you have the shirt bench, then you're out of the shirt. It's rep work, and then you hit the accessories.
Yes.
Right. And now more times than not, there's going to be something that you're going to see, right, on any of these main max effort lifts. Then those weak points are addressed immediately.
Yes.
Okay. Now on the dynamic day, after that dynamic movement's done, I'm going to assume that same assessment is being done, but it's going to be different, right? Because now you're trying to move something with more force, right? So you're going to be looking at that lift differently than a max effort lift.
So on dynamic day, the accessories usually go a little bit heavier. I just have more energy.
Yeah.
Accessories will go a little bit heavier, but even on the dynamic day, I still look at how close to perfect form can I get, and if I notice deviations on my dynamic stuff, it might sound counterintuitive, but maybe I need to slow that down a little bit. Maybe I need to slow down that dynamic side so that I can only go as fast as my form will allow. Because it doesn't make sense if I pop it up off my chest and my elbows flare immediately, but my goal is to carry over to a shirted bench, I need to keep the elbows tucked in until at least the upper half of that movement. Well, if my elbows flare at the bottom, I'm training the wrong pattern. I need to train the motor pattern for as well as my body's going to allow it. I'm only working as much as my body will allow.
Yeah. How much rest are you taking between sets, say on the dynamic bench?
Realistically or ideally?
Realistically.
Realistically, I usually have people who are coming over asking for help. Now, even if I put headphones on, people are come over trying to talk. It might be 3 to 5 minutes, which is longer than I would really like.
Now, are you filming each one and then assessing each one, or looking at them all after?
I don't film each one. That just gets to be a little
Yeah,
monotonous.
yeah.
I usually pick, and again, every day is different. So there's no, any answer that I give pretty much throughout this podcast, there's always going to be exceptions to what I say. But I'll probably film the second or third one. The first one's almost always a warm up. It is still warming up. I'll film, if I'm doing 8 sets, I'll usually film the second or third. And if I'm only filming 2, if I'm lazy that day, I'll do the second or third, and I'll do the 7th or 8th. If I want to film more, it'll usually be like the 2nd, 5th, and 8th or something like that, or 2nd, 5th, and 7th. But try to get something in the beginning, something in the middle, something at the end, and just see how my form changes throughout the day.
Yes. Then how would you address if the middle set, the form breaks down from the middle set to the last set? So then say that's a weak point, right? It can be a technical weak point. It could also be your strength endurance isn't on point.
Yep.
You know, so how do you look at that? Where do you go first? You know, if you see that, do you go into, is it technical, or do you go into it's a strength endurance thing, or actually you need to look at how long the rest was? I mean, there's other factors. So how do you go about that?
Well, I think you just kind of answered that one. Like, that's what I look at. It's, first of all, what set was it? You know, if we're talking set 5, was it a fluke? If I screwed something up rep 5 or set 5, I actually might start filming. I might film rep 6 or set 6. I might film set 6 and see if I could fix it that set. If I can fix it just by thinking about it, probably it was just a fluke and there's nothing wrong. Then if I'm comfortable set 6, might not record set 7, then I'll go record set 8. But if it's still screwed up set 6, then I might record 7 and 8 and just figure out why. If it's a strength endurance thing, maybe I need to tighten up my training a little bit and take shorter rest periods. Maybe I need to train my accessories a little bit harder, like shorter rest periods of my accessories, and build up that conditioning, that upper body conditioning. Again, everything depends.
All right. So the accessories on that day you said are trained harder or heavier, but do they say relatively the same movement patterns that you're training? I don't want to say movements, because the movements are going to change, but if it's a dumbbell press, is it still some type of press that's in there? Is it still some type of extension that's in there, or are they different movement patterns?
Part of that depends on timing. Like if I have an hour and a half to get in and out of the gym, maybe I won't do the dumbbell press and I'll focus more on upper back. Upper back has been something I need to put a little more stress on. So if you would have asked me a year or two ago, maybe I would have skipped upper back and gone more towards a dumbbell press. But now we're here where we are today, and now I need to focus a little bit more on upper back. It depends. Again, it depends on what I need for that day. So repeat that question one more time.
Is the movement patterns of the accessories different? So let's say for triceps, say it's extensions one day and it's push downs the other day. Does it work like that, or is it extensions and push downs on both days? It's just the movement's going to change. One's going to be heavier than what the other one is. So
typically how I'll approach it is I'll do a heavy tricep. I get at least one heavy tricep movement a week, accessory movement a week. Now, I favor decline dumbbell rollbacks, but those put a lot of stress on the elbow. I'm not going to do those twice a week. And if I can still feel any kind of a twinge at all, then I'm not going to do them the next week. If my body's telling me that that tendon hasn't 100% healed, I'm not going to do those next week. I'll do something else. If I do cable stuff, I'll have at least one set in there where it's an AMRAP, like 30 plus reps, no matter what movement it is. If I'm doing single arm or with the triangle bar or a straight bar or whatever, there will always be something higher reps with it. I like changing up the reps. So I might do 2 sets of 12, drop down 2 sets of 8, and then a set of 20 to 30, or at least 20 to 30. I'll put it that way. So I'll do 2 sets of 12, maybe 150, 2 sets of 8, 200, maybe 220, and then a set of 20 with of 110 pounds for as many reps instead of 20 or 30, whatever. If I get that heavy movement in, decline dumbbell rollbacks, with that heavy movement, I will probably do something either cable or banded, usually banded actually, and then just get that blood flow in. Anytime I do a heavy something, I add in sets of 50 plus to try to get that blood flow in to expedite that healing process.
So you like banded push downs is what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Banded push downs are the big one to try to get that blood flow. And I'm sure the kids love it because twice a week we're doing at least 2 sets of 50, if not more reps on banded press downs and hamstring curls. I mean, the kids are hitting 150 to 200 reps a week on that kind of stuff. And that's at the very end of their workouts.
Okay. Then with your max effort exercises, how often will you cycle back to the same movement?
So I have a couple movements that I like to keep in as much as possible because my body just responds very well to them. But my body also breaks down from them pretty well too. So whenever my body feels healed, I'll add it back in. And I think of the body more as I work a lot of the muscle groups, kind of like a bodybuilder does, especially, with isolation movements, you have to.
Yeah.
But I think of the body a lot as muscle groups. So if I'm talking lats, for example, and I'm doing heavy dumbbell rows, but my lats get really sore, I might not do dumbbell rows the next time I go into the gym. Maybe I'll hop on a machine and do 3 or 4 sets of 15 or something. Then I might go more towards reps. I just listen to my body and figure out what it needs. But we have, if you think about upper back, we have however many different exercises. Now we can go single arm. We can double the amount of exercises that we got. There's always variety. There's always something. And being as unregimented as I am with the training, and I say unregimented as in it's not regimented on the specific movement. It's regimented on the muscle groups that I'm trying to work. So as long as I hit those muscle groups, I'm good and I'm happy. If my body is sore and I feel like it's breaking down, I'm not going to double up on it. I'm going to pick something else. I'm going to do a lot of high rep bodybuilder stuff to try to get that blood flow in and recover from that heavier stuff, heavier work.
Yeah. But getting back to the max effort exercise, though, if it is something that's working for you, and granted, you're not going to put it in if you're not ready to put it in.
Right.
But if you were to just guess, is it every 4 weeks, 6 weeks, or is it 12 weeks? I mean, how long will it be until one of those max effort the safety squat bar with bands, for instance?
So we're talking main movement then.
Main movement. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we're talking main movement, that I try to get a little more specific with. So I won't keep anything in longer than 3 weeks in a row.
So you'll run it for 3 weeks.
Usually.
Okay.
Usually. So that safety bar, box squats, briefs and sleeves against band tension.
Yes.
That I really enjoy keeping as a main movement. That is very easy on my body. It doesn't break down my joints very much. I can train that without getting joint sore.
So then what does the week 1 look like versus the week 2 versus the week 3?
That'll be more like a Louis progression where I just add 5% each week. Now,
not dynamic. We're talking max effort.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep. So I might go at the beginning of a training cycle. The max effort isn't a true max effort.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to find what my new max is. I'm not trying to get an actual true max. I'm trying to just work up heavy and get a stimulus. So you could say RPE. I hate RPE, but you could say RPE.
Let's say for you, it's 150 pounds under what you could do.
Yeah.
At the very beginning of the training cycle.
Well, so I'll look at what I did the last training cycle, and I remember my numbers.
Sure.
I remember what they are. So this training cycle, the heaviest that I look at what I did at the top. So the heaviest safety bar box squat that I did this training cycle was 1,059 at the top.
Yes, and that's with the bands.
That's with band tension.
Okay.
Yep. And I think we got there with like 300 pounds of band or 320 in bands or something like that. But I look at what that number was at the top. If I can start out my next training cycle and hit over $1,000 at the top, like the first time I do it next training cycle, if I'm able to hit 1,008 or 1,005 at the top, that's more than where I started the last time. So that means that 1,059, if within the next 5 to 6, and I'm not going to do it every week, but within the next 5 to 6 weeks, if I can work that to 1,075, I've gotten stronger. That's better.
Yes. So you want to try to have it somewhere around where a little bit over where your last week one was.
Yes.
But it doesn't need to be radically over, because that would be stupid, right?
As long as it's something.
Yeah, because the goal is what's going to happen in the third week.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
All right. So then that middle week is somewhere in between.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we have so many different variations of bars. I can pick something different. But now we look at dynamic and max effort. I might do cambered bar for the dynamic effort while I'm doing safety bar for the max effort. If my body feels like I need a little more time with the safety bar, then I'll do maybe I'll do them both in the same week, dynamic and max effort. But that's probably not going to stay in for. It's not going to be like that for more than 1 week.
Okay, so that's a pivot.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be structured, kinda.
Yep.
Right, with the cambered bar.
Yep.
Unless it feels like shit.
Yep.
Then you pivot, and then it goes back to that cambered bar again.
Correct.
Right. I understand this, but we got to figure out how to make the people who are listening understand what you're saying.
Yep.
So the max effort exercise, you're trying, right? But there's always pivots, right? You're trying to have that laid out over a 3-week period of time.
Yes.
Where the third week would be over what your best is from last training cycle, depending upon how far out from the meet it is.
Yes.
Right? Because the number from 6 weeks out may be the different number than 16 weeks out.
Well, so how I think about it in my head is I look at the heaviest that I did the last training cycle. And I don't care if that was week 2 or week 10.
Okay. So then
it was the heaviest that I did.
Yeah. Okay. And that's how that's laid out, unless something goes sideways.
Yep.
And then that second max effort week may be something different.
Yep.
But then it would return, hopefully, to the third that was already put in there.
Yep.
All right. And then the dynamics laid out is in a 3-week wave too.
Yeah.
Okay. So the dynamics laid out in a 3-week wave, but that bar may change based upon how you feel after Monday.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And then obviously that bar is not going to become a harder bar, right? It's going to go a different direction.
Yeah. I mean, and again, depending on what my body needs, if I feel that my low back might need a little bit more effort, then sometimes my dynamic could be a very lightweight good morning with some band tension, and I just do explosive good mornings.
Yes.
That could be. I've gotten into the habit of doing one of the few things that I deviate away from what Louis says is I will do band tension, even dynamic days, with the straight bar sometimes. But the reason why I do it, and Louis' big thing was with a straight bar and bands, it puts a lot of pressure on the shoulders. Well, I have my hands out by the collars in the first place, and I'm not a 308 lifter, so my shoulders aren't that wide. I'd have my arms out for mobility stuff. I tore both rotator cuffs many years ago, and I just haven't built that mobility back. So with my arms so far out, I don't have any shoulder stress when I squat with a straight bar.
Mm-hmm.
So I can do those dynamic days with a straight bar. I have been adding the straight bar back in a little more often because I feel like listening to Anthony Oliveira, Hoff, and a couple of the other guys that came from Westside, one of the big criticisms was they didn't use their straight bar enough, and then they go to the meet and they forget how to use a straight bar, and a straight bar turns into a variation, whereas the specialty bars were the main movements that were being trained.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I tried to get away from that, or I'm trying to get away from that. I am. And now I'm adding the safety or the straight bar back into the rotation, so I never forget how to squat with it.
Yeah.
And so that could be a dynamic day is just a straight bar with bands. But keep in mind, my arms are that far wide. I don't have that shoulder stress. If one of the listeners has a real narrow hands, don't do it. Don't do that.
Well, they can go chain.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be that, and it kind of is going to depend on where they hold the bar too.
Yeah.
A low bar is obviously going to crank the shoulders more than what a high bar is. So as you start leading into a meet, what things out of what you just noted here is going to change?
I'm going to go into full gear a little bit more often, straight weight a little bit more often.
On what day?
Max effort.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the dynamic will stay relatively the same?
Yeah, dynamic stays pretty close to the same.
Okay. So your max effort exercise will then become your gear?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And if I have to travel a little bit for it, then I will. I have the gym that we train out of has a 55-pound Texas squat bar. It's a pretty whippy bar. Like, that's the only squat bar we have. It's the only squat bar I've ever really trained with outside of outside of traveling.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the heaviest squat that I had this training cycle, or the heaviest attempt that I had, was 1150 with band tension at the top. And that was full gear at our home gym, or the gym that I normally go. It's not in our home, but
that can kind of help with the bar though, right? Because it's going to take the whip out of the bar because it's pulling down on the bar so much.
But that bar had so much bend to it, I could barely get out of the hooks.
Yeah. Well, there's that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking more of the oscillation.
Yeah. And that is why I anchor it down with bands.
Mm-hmm.
So if I ever want to do a max effort straight bar lift, I have to anchor it down with bands. It has to be. But I didn't have enough band tension. Like, it was still I had 220 pounds of band pulling down. It was still oscillating quite a bit. So 220 on that bar, I was about 900, 900 plus in straight weight. Still oscillated quite a bit, still vibrated on my back. And then I missed that lift at the very bottom. If you watch the video and zoom in, you can see that the bar shifts on my back. Like, the bands actually pulled it off my back a little bit.
Do you have it on Instagram?
I do.
Hey, pull up his Instagram real quick. All right. So you get down and you lose it at the bottom, which is weird. So what was going on there?
So the bands pulled the bar about an inch down my back. And so that was 1150 at the top. And I actually measured how tight the bands are at the bottom position. They only drop about 60 pounds. Mm-hmm. So that 220 is still 160 pounds of band tension at the bottom. So you take that I don't remember what it was, 937 or something, add that 160, and that's the band tension. That's what it was at the bottom. We're still talking 1,050-ish at the bottom.
Yeah.
1,080-ish maybe at the bottom. So that one kind of sucked. That was, thankfully, the spotters were very good. They caught it. Then my mind went blank. Oh, that was my heaviest. That was my heaviest attempt. The set before that, it was about 1,080 at the top. So that comes out to about 1,000 at the bottom. And that was one of the fastest squats I've ever done. I have no doubt in my mind that, barring the bands pulling the bar down, I would have stood up with it no problem. Mm-hmm. That strength 100% I feel like was there, but it, outside factors, it didn't work.
Just rolled out. Yeah.
Elite FTS was founded in 1998 with the aim to live, learn, and pass on. We've done this through training-related content that allows you to become the strongest athlete and coach that you can. Over the past 2 decades, actually 2.5 decades, we've published more complementary training media than anybody else in the industry. When you look at the number of articles, the Q&As, the blogs, the videos, the podcasts, there's over 1 million pages of content that we've put out there. We've been able to do this through your support of Elite FTS. So when you purchased Elite FTS strength equipment, bands, accessories, gear, apparel, or anything through the site, you directly help support the content that we put out, which in turn helps support other people on their journey of becoming stronger and better coaches. So stronger athletes and better coaches, which encompasses the aim and the vision to live, learn, and pass on. So I thank you for the support that you've been giving for the past 25 years and encourage you to keep supporting Elite FTS into the future so we can all help more people become better and stronger. Discount code Table Talk for 10% off your first order. All right, guys, if you like the Table Talk podcast, then you're going to love the crew. If you're struggling with trying to get through a sticking point, you're trying to figure some specific aspect of your training out that you just can't dial in. You're dealing with injuries. You're trying to figure out how to better optimize your training. All the stuff you're seeing on social media is confusing, and all you need is a little guidance and support, or just somebody to look at your lifts to make sure that they're either heading in the right direction, or if there's a weak point in the lift, they can point out what that weak point is. Well, that's what we have the crew for. So when you join the crew, you get an extra Table Talk podcast each month called the Crewcast. You also get access to our Discord community, which has a training Q&A, form checks with top coaches, mindset section, nutrition, training logs, programs, over 30 ebooks, plus exclusive ebooks just for the crew, webinars, lectures, seminars, giveaways ranging from full strength equipment. We've given away many yoke bars this year. We've given away actually pieces of strength equipment as well as accessory items, and you get exclusive crew discounts. So go to the link in the description that says join the crew, click it, join now, and start getting stronger today. All right, guys, we've got a new limited edition drop, the original Mountain Dog tee that John Meadows had us design from the very beginning. So it's the first tee that he had made. Once again, this is a limited edition item, so when they're gone, they're gone. While I have your attention, you've seen me wear this one in a few podcasts to date. We've been holding back on it. This here, the 4-star tee, I think that's what we call it. It's on the website. New items, also under limited edition. Check out our shoulder saver pads. It's an easy way to do limited restricted range of motion exercises like board press that basically you just pop the pad on the bar, reduces the range of motion, pop it back off when you're done. Thank you guys for the support. Head over to elitefts.com.
All right, so we're going to jump back in, and we found the video that you were talking about, yes, the training video. So go ahead and pull that up here. All right, so just talk me through this.
So this was it would have been 9 something in plate weight.
Right there.
220. Yep. About 220 in the bands.
So that was the bar rolling.
Yeah. So unfortunately on Instagram, we can't really zoom in very much, but if we watch it, oh, there we go. So if we watch right as I hit the hole, you can watch the bar roll.
Yep. Oh, that's a different one.
Yeah, it's a reel. So that was still a grand at the bottom and one of the fastest squats I've ever done.
Yeah, so that was the first. This was the one here.
So if we watch right about here.
Yo, shit, yeah. Well, wait a minute. Go back again. Was that you before the bar or the bar before you?
Well, so there's 2 things.
Yeah.
And after we play it again, I'll go into it. But the bar did roll a little bit. After this, which I don't know if I've really ever told anybody, but squats went god awful this training cycle. I didn't really hit anything that I wanted.
Training cycle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like leading into the WPO this year.
Okay.
I felt the strongest that I ever have, but squats were not correlating and I had no idea why.
Do you know in hindsight?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I sent albeit too late, but I sent a couple of videos over to Rudy and I said, hey, this is what's going on. I don't know if the gear's fitting right. I think it's a little bit too tight. After that squat, that 1150 at the top, after that squat, my legs were turning blue and like they were getting to be numb. So I'm like, okay, well, the gear's a little bit too tight. We got to take it out. But he already took it out at the beginning. My legs grew a full 2 inches this training cycle. I mean, I think they started 26 and a half and they got a little over 28.
Yeah. And that's full canvas too. That doesn't stretch. There's not a cut on the side. Yeah.
And during this time or immediately beforehand, Rudy figured out the supply chain issue and he got a new material. This new material was thicker than the old material. So that didn't help. Well, I sent the gear back to him. He was able to figure out a way how to extend it after it was already extended once. So God bless him for that.
Yeah.
He had to add an extra lining of material to lengthen it. He has that black stripe on the side actually serves a purpose.
Yeah.
My suit now has 2 black stripes sewn together. So
yeah, so that one there does not have the stripe on the side, or it does?
That has one, but it was already extended.
Got it.
And so leading into the WPO, and that was my last squat. That was probably 2 weeks out.
Okay.
So leading into the WPO, I sent the suit to him. We took measurements, and we've gone back and forth with measurements for the last 2 years. But sent him the suit. He extended it out. I had not used the altered suit until the WPO. That was my first time using that suit. And thankfully, it worked perfectly. I mean, it went 3 for 3 on squats, so it worked.
Yeah. So let's jump to that video, the WPO video. There. So that's the new suit.
Yes. I mean,
Okay.
it's the same suit, but just expanded the legs.
All right. So this is your third squat.
Yes.
All right. Stop real quick. I wish it would show your setup, you know, because the way you were explaining the setup to Phil the other day, you're very methodical and technical, which you should be about the setup. Because I think, as we saw, you know, everything matters a lot at this level, probably more than the actual lift. Everything matters. So before that starts, how do you set up getting under the bar, breathing, bracing, and getting everything set?
Yeah, so that was actually one of the subjects that Sheena and I had talked about right before this.
Yeah.
But I have, with all of my lifts, with squat, bench, and deadlift, I have a checklist that I go through my head. And the checklist has to be hit in order. With squat, I walk up to the bar, identify where the center of the bar is. I place my hands, and then I slide underneath. After I slide underneath, hands, center of the bar, hands, then I place my feet. If the monolift has holes on the side for band pegs, it makes it pretty easy to figure out where you need to place your feet. But if it doesn't, I've gotten into the habit of not looking at my feet and then just setting up, because you don't always have those holes on the side.
Yeah, yeah.
So then you learn by feel. Get your feet set up, slide underneath. Get centered, high bar. The pick is the big one. I mean, everybody knows how to set up, but the pick is the big one. I make sure that my femurs go off to the side. I twist my femurs out in my hip socket. As I'm doing that, I squeeze the glutes as tight as I can. By squeezing the glutes, that pushes my hips forward under the bar. And as soon as my hips go under my shoulders, so it's bar, shoulders, hips, ankles. If my knees are going out pretty far, my knees should be right there in line too. By watching that squat, I open up a lot.
Yeah.
And I define opening as moving my knees out and squeezing my glutes forward. So there's a lot of strain right there in the groin.
Now, when do you pull your air?
I take my air before I squeeze my hips through. So it's the second to last thing that I do before I pick the bar. My hips are back. I'm under the bar, feet set, hips go back. Take a deep breath, as deep as I can, squeeze into my belt, and then I slide my hips through.
Got it.
Then I pick the bar. Like we had talked about over the weekend, you don't always know how quick that start command is going to be. So I've gotten into the habit of releasing half my breath and then retaking it right away.
Yeah. But you're getting most of it. Like you're getting all of it, right?
Yep.
Before you get, because I think people they fuck this up too.
Yep.
Right. Because now they're underneath it and they're smashed.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So it's hard to breathe or get as much air.
So by sitting my hips back, it relieves the tension from the straps.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that rack height set just perfect, and just perfect is going to change based on how much bend is in that bar. If you don't have that rack height set just perfectly, when you squeeze and slide underneath with your hips, you're not getting that breath with the straps being pressed down and your shoulders being pressed into that bar.
Yeah. Okay. So now back to the video. So go ahead and start this. So on your way down, what are you intentionally trying to do on the way down?
Squeeze my glutes as tight as I can. It's glutes and belly for me. Glutes and belly. I've gotten into the habit, and you made the comment of it when we were squatting, but I've gotten into the habit of looking straight, which has now turned into looking slightly down. I need to readjust and look up at about a 15 or 30 degree angle. If I look at like a 60 degree angle, it's a little bit too much.
Then the bar can roll.
Yeah, it's about 15 to 30 degrees for me. It's not a huge difference if I look down, but and when I say look down, it's a slight down. It's not curved down. It's a slight down, but it's not a huge difference. But when I go to max effort weight, I notice that I can stay stacked slightly better with my head slightly up.
Mm-hmm. All right, go back to the clip again. So the second clip is the bench, right?
Yes.
All right, so this one here is
777.
Yeah. So stop. All right. So how do you go about how do you go about setting up we'll just walk all the way through it, right? Yep. So you get under the bar.
So with the setup, before I even lay down, arms go out in front, retract the shoulders, and twist down. When I twist down, I'm squeezing the center of my rhomboids and my lats at the same time. It's the bottom of the shoulder blades. So the cue that I always tell people is shoulder blades through the rib cage. If I can visualize taking the underside of my shoulder blade and sticking it through my body, that picks my chest up.
Mm-hmm.
It's not chest up, because I can squeeze my chest up without squeezing my rhomboids. For me, the rhomboids are the secret to all three lifts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, lats too, but it's really rhomboids for me.
Yes. So you're doing that before you lay back.
Yes.
Okay.
So I get set up, squeeze my rhomboids, squeeze my lats, and then with my arms in this zombie position, I just fall back.
Okay.
Then after I fall back, I'm on the bench, keeping my chest up. I can lock that collar into place, and then I reach my hands up overhead. Because again, my chest is up, it's locking that collar. My collar's not moving. I can reach my hands up overhead, grab the bar, and slide myself through. As I slide myself through, I'm able to shift my shoulders down. And I think that might be an anatomical advantage that I have, is I have a lot of mobility in my shoulders up and down. I can shift my shoulders down probably a good 2 inches. Whereas I don't know if other people just don't know how, or if they don't have the anatomy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can shove my shoulders down really far, which means my bar path is about 1 inch or 2 lower than what other people's might be.
Yeah.
With that bar path being lower, I can hit the top of my stomach instead of like a sternum area.
All right. So then when you take it out, how long do you hold it before you bring it down?
Just enough to retake my breath. Because again, if I retake my breath, I demonstrate that I have control over the bar.
Okay. Then on the way down, what are you intentionally trying to do?
I'm trying to squeeze my lats and tuck my elbows. I'm focusing on the touch point. Now, if I can get that lift off a little bit further out and rest my triceps into my lats, if I can lift my triceps into my lats and hold the bar there, that's going to be longitudinally, it's going to be within 1 inch of where I need to touch.
So you're going to start further under the bar as well?
Yes.
Because that shortens the distance.
Correct.
That lift out's going to have to be.
And one mistake that I see a lot of people making is they'll set up with their eyes or even their mouth underneath the bar, but I'll set with my, like, a little bit below my collarbone under the bar.
Mm-hmm.
And my rationale for that is if my touch point is down by my belly and I'm getting my lift off around my sternum or top ab, well, and belly, but second ab.
Yeah.
And if I'm getting my lift off down by my sternum, that's 2 to 3 inches.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason why I need to be setting up under my eyes. If I'm getting my lift off all the way down by my sternum, that's like 18 inches.
Yeah.
So that's unnecessary movement to the bar. I'll set up with my collarbone, and that's still like a 6-inch range of motion or 6-inch movement on the lift off.
Mm-hmm.
If I ever hit the rack, that means the bar is going up over my face, and I'm probably not locking it out in the first place.
Yeah. Okay, so go back to the video. All right, so go ahead and play it. All right, so then on the way up, are you trying to push towards your feet? Or what are you trying to do on the way up? What is your intent?
So the intent and what actually happens aren't 100%.
Why? That's why I asked that. What's the intent? And then how do you, let's go with the intent first, because there's the intent and then there's how you have to recover.
Yes.
From when the intent goes wrong.
So the intent is to pop the bar in a straight line.
Yes.
The first half of that press, I want to pop it into a straight line and not towards the feet, is straight up.
Yes.
Now, after I get to that transition point, then I can flare my elbows a little bit, but that flare that flare will naturally drift the bar back 1 to maybe 1.5 inches. So my bar path, that J pattern, is at most 2 inches. Intentionally, ideally, it's at most 2 inches.
Yeah.
Whereas I see a lot of guys that'll touch low and then lock it out over their shoulders, and that J pattern's about 8 inches.
Okay.
So mine's as straight up and down as possible without it being a front raise, because if I'm up over my shoulders compared to down by my belly, if I touch in my belly and lock out over my belly, that's a 700-pound front raise, and nobody's doing that.
Yeah.
You can go back to, and this is the video that I show everybody, but you can go look at Eric Spoto's 716 at the 2013 Mark Bell Classic or whatever it's called. He made an attempt, or maybe it was 720, it might have been 722, but he made an attempt at the all-time world record raw bench, and he popped it up faster than any other 700-pound bench. He gets it to the lockout and then drops it. But if you look, he pressed it in a straight line over his belly and attempted a 700-pound front raise. It pops straight up and then goes right back down because his shoulders aren't strong enough when the bar is below your shoulders. Now, I have the shirt, so that adds a little bit of support to it too.
Yeah.
And I can kind of play into that shirt a little bit.
All right. Now, if you get hung up trying to touch, what do you do?
Tuck even harder and then drop even lower.
What do you mean drop lower? Drop the bar lower on your belly?
Towards my belly, yeah.
Okay. Because that can become an internal shoulder rotation, right?
Yes. Now,
which can be a problem too.
So if we think about it from a physics standpoint, I'm trying to keep my elbow underneath my wrist, underneath the bar. If the elbow is directly underneath the bar, that's the tricep is the mover. The tricep goes into the elbow, into my forearm. If my forearm drops back into like a skull crusher, now that elbow is not underneath the bar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and if it goes even lower, if it drops down too far, now I'm going into a reverse curl kind of position, and that's not going to work. It has to be stacked straight up and down. In order to lower my touch point, I have to tuck my elbows even further, because now the distance of my humerus is going to allow me to touch lower.
Yeah.
But if my elbows are flared out, you think about your arms like a circle. If it's at a 45, my touch point's going to be higher than if I'm at the bottom of that circle. So if I can tuck my elbows in even further, I can touch lower. If I touch lower, I can push my belly is up even higher.
Yes.
Now, if I am really in a pinch, and I've had to do this once or twice, but if I'm really in a pinch and I'm hovering that last inch, I don't recommend doing it all the time, but you can drop your wrist back a little bit and then get that little extra inch. Now, dropping your wrist back with 700 pounds hurts, so I don't recommend doing that often. I don't recommend training like that, or at least not intentionally. But if you're in a meet and you have to, that's one thing that you can do.
Okay, so now that's the intent.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So now halfway up, things start to come back. Then what do you do there?
If things go a little haywire, it kind of depends on where. If it goes haywire halfway up, there's nothing you can do.
Well, good luck. Good luck. Yeah. Well, let's stay on that for a minute, because now if you're in a meet, are you going to fight through? This is where some people fuck up too. You can fight through it and just kill your third attempt, right? Or you can just say, take it and then save the triceps for the third. You see what I'm saying? It's a tough call, and you got to be very advanced to be able to make that call.
It is, and I screwed up that call once. Back in April, I did an unsanctioned bench only fundraiser, and I had a 837 loaded onto the bar that felt like it barely moved off my chest. And then I go and I told the spotter to take it. I said, no, not going to make it. And I go back and watch the video, and it was within half an inch of lockout, but it felt like it barely moved. And so that was a learning experience for me to not do the judge's job for them.
Yeah.
But moving on from that, I'm probably just going to make the attempt to fight through it because of that, because of that mistake that I made. Because now I realize that my perception isn't always reality.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's tough when you're under a bar and meat too. So,
so if you're at the lockout, you just have to get that last little bit. A couple of things you can do. One, you can flare the elbows even further because the judge's perception is going to be different. If you flare the elbows, if I'm an inch away from lockout and I flare the elbows, now the judges see the outside of my elbows and not that kink in my arm.
Yeah.
The judges might call it a good lift, even if it's not.
Yeah.
Another thing you can do is wear your sleeve even lower. Keep it flush with the elbow, because now you have some of that bulk of the sleeve. It's not over top the elbow, but it's right there in line with the elbow. So that makes it a little harder to see if benches are truly locked out or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying to try to get away with anything, but if you're in that pinch, leave the decision to the judges.
Yeah. All right. Go back to the videos. All right. So which one is this? That is still the
That's
bench.
still my, opener, but that's the only one I got.
Yeah. Okay. And then the third deadlift. Let's get to that. So pause it again. Go back. So walk me through what you're doing here from that initial set pull. Right. There's a reason why I'm going to have you walk through this, because a lot of younger lifters will replicate what you just did there.
Yep.
But they're not. You know what I'm saying? They're just tugging on a bar because they saw you do it.
Yep.
But they don't know what your intent behind doing that is.
Yeah.
All right. So go ahead and pull that back up again.
Specifically tugging on the bar. And that's separate from everything else.
Yes. So the tug before the pull.
Yep. And I can go to the rest of the setup, but the tug is separate. That's a thing all of its own.
Well, let's go to this setup just
okay.
to walking to the bar and setting your feet. So let's go all the way back.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
I wish they would show these things, by the way, because a lot of these things matter. You know what I'm saying?
So I trim my videos so people just see the lift.
I know, but you have to, because that's what they want to see.
Yeah.
But here's the shitty part. And this is why training with a crew of lifters is important, because you see all the shit that happens before that.
Yep.
Because a lot of those things really matter a lot, you know, but I get it. You know, I get why people do it, because nobody's like, what the fuck? I don't want to watch this shit for 3 seconds. But okay. So I'll go ahead and pause that so we can watch that deadlift again. So you're at the chalk bowl, you walk up to the bar, then walk me through your setup.
So the deadlift bar makes it nice and easy because you have lines on the outside.
Yeah.
You can see. So the first thing is to make sure that your feet / shins are equidistant apart from that line.
Now, are the lines going to be the same on a kabuki bar and a Texas bar?
Very likely not. I've never used a kabuki bar,
Okay,
but very likely not.
Okay. So you still kind of going back to what you said with the squat, using the monolift band pegs, is you need to know what it's supposed to feel like.
So you need to know what it feels like. And I think the kabuki bar probably has wider lines.
I don't know. I'm just hypothetically, because
so let's say it does.
As a USAPL, right?
Yep.
It's a power bar.
Yeah.
So those lines are most likely not going to be the same.
So if you set up on a bar and it seems like the lines are not where you're used to pulling on a Texas bar, and now you have a one with wider lines.
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah.
Or
for whatever reason.
For some reason, your deadlift bar has 2 lines on it, like Olympic bars or something.
Or it's a shitty bar and you can't even see the lines.
Yeah. So you got to know how it feels. But if there's any kind of line, any kind of indicator, maybe you find maybe there's some kind of tape on the platform that's, hopefully it's equidistant. Hopefully the bar's centered.
Yeah.
Hypothetically speaking, let's say there's tape on the platform and the bar is centered on the tape.
Yeah.
You need to find some kind of indicator to make sure that your legs, your feet, are equidistant apart from that indicator.
Mm-hmm.
Lines make it super easy.
Yeah.
Now, if it's not the same as what you're used to, and you notice that, well, I'm used to having my shins outside the lines, but these are pretty far out, and so now my shins are inside the lines, that doesn't matter as long as you're equidistant. Okay.
Now, for you personally, are you stacking your knee with your ankle?
Yes.
Well,
or the best that I can.
When you push, because see there, right, it's not, but when you flare, it will be.
Yes.
Right. So you get what I'm saying? So somebody could, if they don't know that, and then they're trying to keep it, like if that was to be equal with your knee, and from that position there, your feet would have to be in closer. But you're going to push your knees out.
Yes.
Right?
Well, so
you see what I'm saying?
Yes, but it doesn't matter, because if I'm if I'm set up and I'm symmetrical on both sides, if my knees are not fully pushed out, but they're not pushed out to the same extent on both sides, it's still equidistant.
No, okay. Yeah.
It's still going to be equidistant. Then I
Okay.
slide my hips through and they move out at the same distance.
Okay. So you're set. Where do you pull your air before you go down?
No.
Do you pack your shoulders before you go down?
So the way that I set up my deadlift, it's very similar to the squat. It's a checklist. I walk up, I set my feet equal distance apart from whatever indicator on either side. And then after my feet are set, toes are angled out at the same distance. I personally like about a 30 degree. 45 is a little bit too far, but if I go extra wide, maybe I will go out a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
The problem I have with going too wide with the toes is now you have stability issue at the top. You have to look at the longitudinal distance. So if I have my foot angled out at a 45, you look at where the bottom of the heel is to the top of the toes, and you can take a measurement.
Yeah.
But if I'm conventional and my feet are vertical, that's a really big distance. Nobody's going to have balance issues conventional. But if you have your toes pretty far out and they're straight at a 180, you're going to have balance issues at the top of sumo.
Mm-hmm.
Angling your toes forward is going to help alleviate some of that balance issues. So as the individual, you got to figure out what is the most
the furthest you can go with the best stability.
Yeah.
I guess that would be the best way to say it.
Yeah. So after you get your feet set up, after you get, lower body set up, first thing I do is I sit my hips back and I move my hips back, femurs out, just like a squat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, head up, chest up, just like squat. I will squat down until my fingertips touch the bar. The tip of my middle finger touches the bar. My back's already set. I set it at the top. Now I rotate at the hips. I extend my knees and I rotate forward at the hips. My shoulders are pretty far over the bar and I'm putting most of the weight on my toes at this point so I can get my hands set. And I pull hook grip. If you're a mixed grip, you probably don't need to do this step, at least not too bad.
Mm-hmm.
But I pull hook grip so I get my hook set. Then I take my breath while I'm forward. What that does is it allows room between my arm and my rib cage. I can take my breath because there's no pressure on my ribs. My ribs can't expand. If I get my breath when I'm already sunk into it, now my triceps are pushed up against my ribs. They can't go anywhere. I get a super small breath. So I take my breath when I'm forward. Then as I sit back, I'm squeezing my hips forward, pulling up on the bar. Before I sit back, I do that little yank on the bar.
Yes.
That's because I've had hook grip has been my biggest Achilles heel in this whole sport. The hook grip, and my mixed grip is even worse than my hook grip. So as much as I struggle with hook grip, it's still better than mixed grip. My hook grip has been a struggle to try to figure out how to get it to work. And about 3 weeks out from the meet, I had some kind of a formula that worked for me. And I applied it at the meet and I went 3 for 3 for the first time ever. Pulling up on that bar takes the skin in the thumb and pulls it down so my skin's taut. It took me a little bit to realize that. I had 2 good pulls ever prior to this, 2 good pulls ever in the gym with hook grip. And I noticed that both of those I yanked up on the bar. The intent with those 2 pulls was just to get a little bit of aggression into the bar. But I realized that pulling the skin taut, it's less deviation when I start to pull.
So that's setting your hook grip.
That's
more.
setting my hook.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Go ahead and play. All right. So then when you go to pull there, how much, the quote, pull the slack out of the bar, right? So are you intentionally trying to pull slower?
Yes.
And then after you feel the bar slack come up, then put the force?
As soon as I yank on the bar, I don't totally relax from the bar. I yank up on it and then I keep in that top position. Now, once I slide my hips through, there'll be more tension applied to the bar.
Yeah.
But if I relax into the bar, then that skin goes loose again, and it was a moot point.
Yeah.
So I keep some tension into the bar, and then I slide my hips through into the bar, picking my shoulders up, sliding my hips through, sliding the hips, squeezing my glutes as I keep my glutes squeezed. That locks my femurs into that outward position, into that open hip position.
So you're using your glutes to drive the knees out, not
Yes.
the knees to drive the glutes.
Correct.
It's the same thing, but people do it different ways. But I think the way that you're doing it is the way people should do it.
Well, I appreciate that.
Well, you can push your knees out, but not flex your glutes as hard.
So the caveat to all of this is nothing happens by accident. And just because somebody's trying to do it doesn't mean they are.
Yes.
You have to have the intent behind it, and you have to know what that intent is.
But when you feel it,
Yeah.
you know it.
You know it.
We saw it this weekend, right? You know, when he fell with a pick, but same thing with just the bar's in a different place.
Yep.
It's like, oh my God. Well, now you know.
So the way that I try to explain it to a lot of people is you're never going to get your muscles firing the way they need to while you're already under the weight. You need to get everything firing before you get the weight on your back, before the weight's in your hands, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be, as everybody says, get tight. What does get tight mean? I take it that one step further and say get tight means squeezing my glutes, keeping my knees out. I'm pulling the bar with a squat. I'm pulling the bar down across my back with my lats. I'm pulling it down, trying to bend that bar. It's all these different things, but I explain to people what muscles should be activated with this specific movement. If I'm breaking the bar across my back, I'm not actually breaking the bar. I'm flexing my lats, trying to pull down. You know, my fingertips are holding it, pulling down with my lats.
Mm-hmm.
I'm squeezing my glutes forward. But I explain the muscle groups that are supposed to be used.
Okay.
And I've been coaching for about 10 years. And if you explain the muscle groups and barring the individual, like you got to be careful with the individual. But if you poke that muscle, the proprioception, if you poke that muscle as they're trying to flex it, that usually helps people learn how to fire in that certain order.
Do you find that works? I'm going to jump ahead of topics here a little bit. Do you find that works with your high school kids? Because you know what I'm saying? They don't know how to flex their muscles.
That's how I teach them.
Okay.
Yeah. But
poking and basically grabbing it so they know what it feels.
Now, you know, if we're talking about minors, we're talking about glutes. I might take a pen.
No, yeah, I get it. Yeah.
But
no, let's stay on that because that's an important fucking point, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't just go grabbing minors all over the place, right? Because ask permission too.
Yeah. Well, so that is another big one is before I do anything, I always tell them either this is what I'm going to do or can I do this?
Yes.
And if I take the approach, hey, I'm going to touch you, and they say, oh, and I see them like kind of hesitate, I'll backtrack. Is it okay if I touch you?
Yeah.
But if it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, they're okay with it.
Okay. No, it's important to kind of harp on that a little bit because it's people from my generation are just so used to it.
Yep.
That it's like, whoa, dude, like, you know.
We had an individual who, and it was a couple of years ago, but we had an individual who had never done any kind of sports, never gone out, never done anything. Lifting was their first sport. And this individual was not comfortable with being touched. We didn't, but they weren't comfortable with watching other people get touched. And it's like, okay, that's something you kind of got to get over. Like, it's a team atmosphere. We're trying to coach other people. I'm not going to accommodate to your insecurity when I'm trying to work with, however many other people.
Yes.
Like turn around.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one of those things. Like we actually had to have that conversation.
Yes. Well, it's important that you knew to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But that's an outlying case.
And I don't remember, but I think they ended up dropping from the team.
Yeah. All right. Go back to the lifts. Now with the deadlift towards lockout, once it clears your knees, if it becomes rough there, what is your correction? Like if the deadlift gets hard at the top, do you intentionally try to squeeze the glutes more, or are you trying to arch more? because I know in your head you're running through these things where a lot of other lifters are just like, fuck it, I'm going to keep pulling.
Kind of a trick. So kind of a trick question, because grip has always been my limiting factor.
Yeah.
That was like a 30, 40 pound PR, and it looks like an opener. That was my first time grip actually worked. If I put straps on, I'll pull 100 pounds more.
Yeah.
So I've never had that struggle without straps.
Okay.
But with straps, I mean, barring grip, the goal is to always just push my hips forward.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because with grip being the limiting factor, it always has been, I've noticed that if my thighs hit my hands too early, my grip pops, or my hook pops open.
Mm-hmm.
So I've started pulling a little more forward, and almost like how Yuri Belkin pulls, where he locks his knees, then pulls back. I pull up and then push my hips forward into the bar, which is opposite of a lot of people. A lot of people will pull up and then lean back. If you watch, could you go to the opening deadlift? You can watch the bar path because they film from the side.
It's
last
number 9. It's the second to last one.
Nope.
So the same slide. It's the one right before that.
So you can see the bar path. This one.
Yep.
The bar goes straight up and hips move forward.
Yep.
And this is probably the best my deadlifts have ever looked.
All right, go to the squat that's from this side.
So that would be video 4. This one.
This one. All right, go back so we can see the start again, because you can kind of see the pick a little bit. It probably needs to play through again.
Yeah.
All right. So you see the intent there with the knees and actually the glutes, right? Pulling it out.
Yep.
But you can also see the difference between the perception of depth from the side compared to the front.
Right.
Which I'm glad they put this out there. Now with you, how is there any difference between your squat stance and your sumo deadlift stance, or is it the same? Because it's hard to tell from the video there. It looks pretty close.
I've messed around with varying both. Currently, they're about the same.
They're about the same.
Yeah.
So do you have residual fatigue from the squat to the pull?
In a meet, no. But, I mean, and again, grip being that limiting factor,
Okay.
I'm capable of pulling 100 pounds heavier.
So it could be.
It very well
if
could
you had
be.
straps.
I haven't had that point yet.
Yes.
I haven't reached that level yet.
Yes. Okay. Well, the reason I ask that is, do you train conventional?
It's a variation that I toss in every couple of weeks.
Okay. So let's say you tweak something on the squat that you had to pull conventional.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the ability to do that and stay relatively close to the same numbers?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No.
Okay.
I probably do need to pull conventional a little bit more often. That's more of an off-season thing that I do.
Yeah.
During meet prep.
Let's say you strained an adductor a little bit on the squat.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're kind of fucked, right?
Yep. Yes. During meet prep, I probably favor good mornings a little bit.
Okay.
But even then, I do a lot of wide stance good mornings. Dead stop, dead stop, sumo stance, good mornings with the cambered bar. Preferably with bands, even. Love them. Those are a really good builder for me.
All right. So the good mornings with the cambered bar with the bands. Couple questions real quick. Are the bands going around the plates or around the bar?
So I use the cheap old Titan Fitness cambered bar.
Mm-hmm.
It has the 2 levels. Where it sits in the rack, it extends out pretty far. I put the bands up over that.
All right. So it's a rackable camber bar.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the reason I ask is because with the cambered bar, the swing is part of the motion of the bar, right? But the bands are going to take that swing away.
So the bands don't take the swing. Oh, when I have it set up that way,
Yeah.
it doesn't take the swing away, but the bands go on either side of the bar. So it limits the swing just enough that it doesn't throw me too far out of the groove, but there still is a little bit of a swing.
What do you mean on either side of the bar?
So you have
Do you have a video of that?
probably not.
Okay. So talk
But-
me through it.
So we can imagine what a rackable camber bar looks like.
Yeah,
The plates go on.
That's what most people have, by the
Yes,
way,
yeah.
because they don't have the monoliths.
Yeah. So we don't have. We have the plates, and then we have that extension from the bar where that 14 inches drop down.
Yeah.
That right there, the band goes around that little extension from the sleeve, and then goes up over that top rack,
Okay.
that
got
rackable
it.
part.
Yep.
So with the bands pulling down from it, it's going to limit how much swing because the bar is going to hit the bands on either side,
Yeah.
but it doesn't negate the swing.
Mm-hmm. I get it. You see where I was going with that?
Yes.
Because that will kind of, a lot of people will like to squat with the cambered bar,
Yes.
but it almost negates the whole purpose of it
Mhm.
if they have it grounded,
Yep.
with the bands, but then some of them will also grab it up high, which
Yeah.
is like, what the fuck is the difference, between all this?
Yep.
Where do you grab the cambered bar for the good mornings, or if it's a squat?
Where I find it most comfortable, and where I prefer is down at the bottom where my hands are parallel to the ground.
Yes.
The caveat to that is I usually will curl my hands and it'll just be like my palm and my fingertips,
Mhm.
because I also recognize that if I have a safety rack there, like let's say I blow a disc or something in the middle of a good morning and it drops, I'm not going to grab that bar and smash my fingers between the safety.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing that, I'm going to be curling my hands and I'm going to make sure that the palm of my hand and my fingers stay in the upper half of that shaft.
Yeah. I've always wanted people to put their hands down there as well.
Yep.
Because going up high, we're putting the upper back into it.
Yep.
Because now you're able to get your upper back tight again. And then what really is the difference, if we're trying to put more focus on the erectors and glutes and so forth. And yes, there's still a difference because it's not here, it's down here. But if you're doing it to put greater emphasis in those other areas, why not just go all out
Yes.
and put the most emphasis on there as you can? It's actually a pet peeve of mine, to be honest with you. It's like, what the fuck? Like, why? Anyhow, to get that aside.
But that's the only caveat is if you're going to have your hands down there at the bottom, I don't recommend wrapping your fingers around, because if you're in a rack or you have the mono straps, if something happens, you're smashing your fingers and breaking some knuckles.
Yeah. Well, I think the important part is, even with the max effort exercises, you have to think about why you're doing it.
Yep.
What's the intent? And then how can you emphasize that intent to the greatest ability, which is one of the things, just listening to you over the weekend, you do with everything,
Mhm.
which is super important, where some people might get it with the max effort exercise and the main movement, but then they lose it when it comes to all the accessories.
Yep.
Where you're doing it with all those as well. And when you do things like that, you're able to establish what Louis would call testers and builders,
Yes.
right? And you already mentioned earlier, the decline rolling dumbbell extensions are a tester.
Yep.
For you. And
They work as both.
well, yeah, it is both. Well, both. They kind of all do that,
Yeah.
but it takes time and this intent to be able to figure out which things have what I would call dynamic correspondence to the main lifts. Because once you know those, that's gold, right? Because then you don't have to push those main lifts as often, as hard. Because you kind of know. You can experiment with other shit in the off season and know real quick if it's helping, because those things will start to go to shit, right? The other thing it does is it also, when you start to look at if the rolling dumbbell tricep extensions are one of those for you, then you can also think with your other tricep movements, what can I do to make those better?
Yes.
Right? And then that's the hierarchy of how you build that main lift.
Well, that's been my philosophy, which again came from a Louisism, but that's my philosophy.
Yes.
Now, the one thing that I want to do that I haven't been able to do is with the single arm cable press downs. I want to put a band around that cable stack, but I haven't been able to put a band around the cable stack. So now I can do explosive extensions with one arm. I haven't been able to find a way to do that. I mean, yeah, you can take a band and just tie it together.
Yeah.
But now you're pulling one side of the stack and that can, damage the machine.
Mm-hmm.
So now you got to make sure that you're tying it evenly on both sides, but I want just a little bit. And I mean, I don't have access to unlimited bands either.
Is it selectorized?
Yes.
Can the band go on the pin?
Maybe.
You see what I'm saying? If you had a longer pin, or
I might have to bring my own pin from home.
Yeah,
or
well, we used to have pins that, not that we sold, but we used to have pins in the gym, and I don't know if I have one here anymore. It was longer and it rounded up just a little bit.
Well, you could almost just get the right size bolt as long as it's like 14 inches and the end is smooth and not threaded.
Yeah, then you just have to figure out how to anchor it under the machine, but fuck, a dumbbell would work too. That sits right in front of the machine.
I've never
thought
about
to be able to anchor
that.
the bat, to be able to anchor that.
Well, you just answered my question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what you got to watch though is the angle, obviously the angle of the band, because it can go flying out.
Yep.
But if it's enough band tension, it won't.
Well, that's somebody else's problem.
Well, I know, but if there's enough tension, it's going to, put pressure on the pin.
Yeah.
Which locks it kind of up in there with that.
Yeah. Well, my biggest concern so far, because I've tried just taking a band and tying it around the plate stack and then whatever cross beam is underneath the stack.
Yeah.
The issue that I've had, which I mean, arguably comes from cheap stacks or cheap equipment, they're not held in tight on the pins. So now you're pulling one side more than the other, and it kind of grinds up against the uprights.
Yes.
Well, it's not my equipment.
Well, it's that too. But the other thing that ends up being is it's single arm.
Yep.
Right. So then your progression becomes tough.
Yeah.
Right. Because they might be 10-pound plates, right? If you're using 50 pounds, another 10 pounds, if you're trying to progress this over a 5-week period of time is a big fuck. You go from like 10 reps to 3. Yeah. But that's manageable, just different bands,
So the other thing that I am a little more relaxed with in my training, I don't always keep track. I do a lot with what can I do that day. I don't necessarily have to track everything over time.
Yeah.
But as long as I remember the rough ballpark. So if let's say 50 pounds, we're just going to say 50 pounds single arm press downs. If the intent of the single arm press down is to increase my rolling tricep extension, and the intent of the rolling tricep extension is to increase my shirted bench, what do I care about my single arm extension?
Yeah.
As long as I'm doing the single arm extension, and in the end my bench press goes up, I don't care about my single arm extension.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just one thing I've gotten a little more relaxed about. As long as I'm doing the movement, that's mostly what I care about. No, yeah, everything goes up kind of over time.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully it goes up over time, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately it's that bench press that I care about, and my bench press is going up. Now,
when the meet is over, and I don't like the terms off season, prep, all this other shit, but that is what it's all called now, right?
It's what people understand.
Yes. So when the meet is over, how do you physically change your training after the meet for whatever? Because you compete once a year, I believe is what you told me over the weekend, right?
That's what it's turned into.
Yeah. So now you're a ways off.
Yeah.
All right. So how does your training change for this block? Because everything's still blocked, no matter what anybody wants to say. There's still 3-week waves that are blocked with intent. So how does it change now? And then how will we'll just stay with that. Then I'll get into how it will transition back into. So what does it look like now?
So it depends on what is my next goal. So being in the Army Reserves, a lot of times I'll do a meet, and then 2 or 3 months out, I might have some kind of Army training I have to go to. Or I'm a drill sergeant in the Army Reserves. So during the summers, I have to go down to basic training land and yell at miners.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to make sure that my cardio is up. I might not be doing, I might not be doing max effort in briefs or max effort in full gear. Spoiler, I'm not doing max effort in full gear.
Well, you're probably not doing a whole hell of a lot of cardio either the last 5 weeks before a meet. Or are you?
So no, but it depends on what we're talking about. I got a dog and I go for a mile walk with the dog every day. That's my cardio.
Okay. Yes.
No, I'm not going out for runs, but
Yeah.
I'm still messing with the sled and I'm going for a mile walk every day.
Okay. So you're not stripping everything out totally.
Right.
Okay.
But just keeping in a 20, 30-minute walk every day, that also increases your recovery, decreases recovery time rather.
Yes.
So that helps. And with the Army standard currently being a 21-minute 2 mile, I mean, we can just about walk that. So I don't need to do, I mean, they're not going to like me saying this, but I don't need to maintain my running as long as I just keep my name off the commander's desk.
Yeah. That was one of the topics that I think you had in here was the standards, right? The Army, I can't read my writing.
It was the whole Army's philosophy on wellness.
Yes.
The 7 dimensions of wellness.
Yes.
And that has evolved over time. And historically, the thing that the Army has been really, really good at has been infantry tactics. They are really, really good at going in, busting down doors, and training people how to do squad maneuvers. The U.S. military is arguably the best in the world at combat. But some of the other stuff kind of lacks. Like the military is one of the most disorganized organizations of all time. You go into it and you see the people and you try to go into finance. Well, the finance office is open 2 hours a day on Wednesday and Thursday in the middle of the duty day. Well, when are you going to go have time to go see finance? So, like, lots of different disorganization.
Mm-hmm.
And then you try to get 15 people in a room who all have 20 years of leadership experience, and suddenly nobody knows how to lead. I mean, it's that kind of stuff. Actually, wrong phrasing. It's not that they don't know how to lead. It's that ideas don't correlate with each other.
Okay.
That'd be a better way to phrase it.
Okay.
But lately, the Army has gotten fantastic with their 7 dimensions of wellness. So I went through the Master Fitness Trainer course in 2021. The instructor that I had was one of the individuals. He was a part of a team, a small team, but he was a part of the team that was paid by the government to go around and learn strength and conditioning and other wellness tactics, the 7 dimensions of wellness, spiritual, I don't remember all of them, but the 7 dimensions of wellness. Learn habits, learn what those are from civilian practitioners. So now the military is recruiting, inadvertently recruiting civilians to teach what those principles are to apply to the military. And when I went through the Master Fitness Trainer course, we had a Google Drive of 200 different legitimate resources. If you have a question on this subject, this is where you go to. And the physical dimension of wellness, it was a very expansive one. That's what everybody cares about. That's what everybody's interested in. And believe it or not, Westside Barbell was one of those resources. There was a whole list of podcasts. Matt Wenning was on there. What's it called? Like the Ludus Magnus Gym. Like they have resources that they put out. I believe your training vlogs were one of the resources on there. So the individual who went through and compiled all of these resources, he's still doing it. Generally speaking, in the military, you're going to stay in a role for 2 to 3 years. If you're really good, they might extend you out to 4. He was in this role for 8 years. That's unheard of. Like he spent over half of his career just compiling these resources and rewriting what the field manual was, what the doctrine is to teach wellness to the military. Now the military, if you look at the FM 7-22 or the ALARACT 7-22, DAPAM 7-22, they have instructions how to sleep. It's, if you're struggling with your sleep, these are the habits that you need to get figured out. We're not taking nicotine right before bed. We're not drinking an energy drink at 8 p.m. when we get released from duty at 9 p.m. if you need to work on your sleep, this is what you're doing. For commanders, this is what we recommend the sleep habits turn into. If you're in the field and having a dedicated sleep schedule isn't possible, this is how we get around it. You know, we're going to recommend doing a 50-50 sleep guard, which means one person's sitting in a foxhole playing guard, the other person's falling asleep for 30 minutes, and then you alternate back and forth, back and forth. But they finally started caring about the wellness of the soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And to my understanding, and I don't know a whole lot about the other branches, but the Army spent the most money, the most resources developing this. When I went through that master fitness trainer course, one of the instructors he had just competed at a high level in, I think it was the best soldier competition. They have a bunch of best competitions, best ranger, best sniper, best drill sergeant, best whatever. And I think it was just the best soldier competition, but he competed at the division level, which is like the third highest level you can get to. He did an experiment, and what the new FM 7-22 recommended with sleep, with caffeine intake, they have guidelines for how much caffeine you should take in what standard period of time. And this is to optimize performance, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
He utilized the official Army guidelines during this week-long exercise. And you're lacking sleep. You're doing 22 hours of exercise some days. You know, that kind of stuff. There's memory stuff that you have to go through. There's shooting. You know, how do you control your blood pressure when you're trying to shoot? He used the official guidelines, and his performance increased from last year to this year, and it increased by a substantial amount. He had been doing these competitions year after year, and the percentage of his performance increased greater when he started following the official Army doctrine, the new Army doctrine, as opposed to the previous years. Yeah, there was a consistent increase because he's getting in better shape, but the amount of increase was more this last year.
Yes. How much of that do you use with your training, your powerlifting?
I had already been doing a lot of it.
Okay.
So I didn't have to change a whole lot. Now,
were there any things that you didn't know that you applied?
So with powerlifting, not so much, because I can create my own schedule. I mean, within reason.
Yeah.
Right. For the most part, I have control over my schedule. I can figure out how much time I need to spend in the gym in the evening. I can optimize what I need to. This is referring to like in a tactical setting.
Sure.
Sitting at home in the middle of Wisconsin is not a tactical setting.
No.
But if I were to go out and do a 7-day field exercise, I'm gonna do what's called sleep banking. I'm going to make sure that I'm getting 9 or 10 hours of sleep ahead of time for those 3 or 4 days leading into that exercise. And now if I am those first 3 or 4 days, or first probably 2 or 3 days, if I'm getting 4 hours of sleep, I have 4 or 5 days, 3 or 4 days ahead of time that I've slept extra. It's better than being short on sleep for the whole, for that whole period of time.
Mm-hmm.
The sleep banking is what that's called.
Okay.
And then for caffeine, they recommend, I don't have it memorized, but I believe it's something like no more than 200 milligrams of caffeine in a 4-hour period. And then outside of that 4-hour period, 50 milligrams every other hour, not to exceed 400 milligrams in a 24-hour period. So you can bulk 200 milligrams, but then you're not taking anything for another 3 to 4 hours. And then you take 50 milligrams every hour for 4 hours.
But can't you use those things for meat? Bank your sleep before?
You can, but so yes, that I do. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
Yes.
But I also just try to get a lot of sleep anyways.
No, I know.
Yeah. If you're in that situation, if you're one of those people that struggles on sleep, then absolutely, the week of the meet, maybe you're not watching TV before bed and you get that extra hour of sleep, or do the best you can to get that extra hour of sleep. If you're the whole caffeine thing, if I'm at a meet, within reason, because you can go overboard, but my goal is a combined total of, they say 9 minutes on the platform. You're not on the platform for a full minute. So the entire duration of a squat might be 20 seconds when you go down and up. In multiply, it's quick or raw. But I'm trying to maximize my performance in probably a combined total of 3.5 minutes, if we're being realistic about it.
Yeah.
3.5 minutes under load. So I'm just trying to bulk, I'm trying to bulk as much caffeine as I can. I want to get as much adrenaline, as much neurocontractile strength as possible in that short period of time. If, I'm going to crash afterwards, my CNS is going to be shot. I don't care about that Sunday after the meet. I have nothing to do that day anyways.
Yeah.
Monday, I'm probably not taking a whole lot of, I'm not taking a whole lot of caffeine. I'm getting really good sleep Sunday to Monday because I'm not getting any sleep Saturday to Sunday. So it's not totally applicable, but that's not to say that nothing's applicable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, that's specifically talking about caffeine, sleep, and the physical dimension. If we're talking about the spiritual dimension, that's a whole nother thing. Absolutely, you can apply that. And I forget what the other dimensions of health are, but the physical aspects of powerlifting is pretty different than the physical, the physical requirements in a tactical situation.
Well, I would hope so.
So they're, I don't know. There's a lot of people going to war with the bar.
Yeah.
So not everything is applicable. But when we're talking about the other stuff, like what do you do with your day-to-day life? The social aspect, social dimension is another one. Yeah, you can make sure that you have healthy social relationships. You can make sure that you have a productive family life. You can make sure that you have a good social life. Maybe we're not going out to the bars every weekend, but if we are going to the bars, maybe we're not drinking and we're just having a good time with friends. That if we're staying out till 2:30 in the morning, well, hopefully we're not doing that every weekend.
Yeah.
In the eyes of optimizing performance. If you're not trying to optimize performance, I don't care what you do.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, there's the Army does have really good guidelines for how to manage those 7 dimensions.
Right. So when we get back to your off season, which is now, so what changed? Obviously, a lot of things are going to change with your training. But a lot of things aren't because it's still conjugate based.
Yes.
Right. So say you take the week off after the meet, the way that I kind of like to lay this out is, this is very generalized, but say your last heavy pull is 21 days out, your last heavy squats 14 days out, your last benches. So that last month leading into, you have a decreased in total workload and volume because you're peaking. Then you have the meet, which is the meet, 3 minutes, what you just said. And then you have the week after, which is pretty much nothing.
I don't even go into the gym.
Which is off. Yeah. So now if you look at your total volume, if you sets times reps, forget the weight, you look at the total volume, it's very, very low compared to most times, where some lifters will take that week off and they just come back in full bore, but they don't realize they just had a whole block that was very high intensity weight, percentage of weight, and very low volume, but then end up, I think, losing a great opportunity of being able to slowly pull things back up to increase work capacity and all these other things, because they're trying to build everything in a week. So what is your process when you get back into the gym on building the work capacity? Because it's going to be a different work capacity, right? Because you're going to have to pull the endurance back up a little bit, right? So what does that look like?
So my philosophy with training, one, it depends on what is my next goal.
Yes.
So like I said, sometimes I have Army stuff coming up shortly after. My next goal is then going to be Army stuff. Then I am working on conditioning. Maybe I actually do go out for a couple runs, right? Like, God forbid, I really don't want to.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe I actually do. Work on conditioning work, just my biggest philosophy, other than what's my next goal, what's my next thing that I have to do timeline wise, is working on everything that probably got put on the back burner during the meet prep. So if conditioning work got put on the back burner a little bit, I might be picking up a little more conditioning work. Like lately, I've been doing a lot more farmer's handles. You can make an argument that I probably should have been doing that during the prep a little bit, but I also didn't have access to them. So we were able to pick up a pair for the gym. So we just got a pair the week after the WPO, or 2 weeks after, something like that. So conditioning work is probably going to go up. I'm to the point now that I'm just doing 1 meet a year. So my next competition, we're talking fall. 10 and a half months out. I don't care what I squat next month. I don't care what I squat in April. If I was doing the semifinals, sure. But thankfully the WPO is set up that top 3 don't have to go to the semifinals. So I don't care what I squat in April.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on everything that I don't normally work on. So it's gonna be a lot more high reps. And my accessories usually are pretty high reps anyways, but I might be doing a lot more sets of 50. Like if I'm going to the belt squat, maybe I'm doing a set of 50 belt squat, building up some of those small connective tissues deep in the hip.
Mm-hmm. What about max effort and dynamic work?
It changes. So my max effort is probably going to turn into something that I didn't focus on during meet prep. So I don't pick a bar. You know, the right behind you got that multi-grip bar.
Yeah.
I might be doing a little bit more on the multi-grip bar. I probably didn't do I didn't do a whole lot with the multi-grip bar this training prep. Well, I might be doing a lot more in the off season, or the safety bar is something I pretty much always keep in. That's been a bread and butter. I might work a little bit more on plyometrics. One thing that I actually do want to get more into is agility work. And when being 220 pounds, or 230, I can do a little bit of agility work, and I have a basic level of athleticism. Now, if I'm 275 or 300, that agility work is going to look a little bit different.
Yeah.
But
why do you want to put that in?
Because anytime you have that lateral impact, so say I have 2 cones set up and I'm seeing how many times I can go back and forth between 2 cones in 30 seconds. Anytime that foot hits the ground in that lateral impact, I'm building up those small connective tissues in the hips, knees, and ankles. Now I spend my off season building up my hips, knees, and ankles, and suddenly that max effort work is going to hurt my joints a little bit less.
Yeah.
So that's the intent. And people forget about agility work. They forget about the glory of cones, doing cone drills. Now, if I'm 275 pounds, maybe I'm walking them, but I'm still doing the motion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually one of the things that they brought up in the Army is if you're doing these agility work, and I'm using that term broadly.
Yeah.
We can do cones, we can do ladders, you go to any football coach and they'll give you 40 different drills. I don't care what they are, just do any of them, pick 3.
Anything with what you're talking about is the deceleration, right? Which is eccentric work of those joints.
Yes.
Yes.
So one of the things that was brought up in our Master Fitness Trainer course was doing those agility drills for service members. You toss a ruck on and you're going to walk through the woods and you step on a root and now you roll your ankle. Well, if you have really strong connective tissues around your ankle, now you're not a casualty in the middle of a ruck.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that needs to be kept in. And I'm not doing agility work while I'm just got done with a 1,000-pound squat.
Yeah.
But in the off season, I might be.
Mm-hmm.
Jumps are another big one, which I do try to keep seated box jumps in my training. I had a little bit of a back something going on for a while, so I've noticed that I haven't been able to jump because it hurts my back. But in working with Sam a little bit, I think hopefully we figured out what was going on. He was able to relieve that pain pretty instantaneously. So that was kind of a miracle worker right there.
Yeah. Well, that there will be something you're going to focus on in the next phase too.
Well, and so yes. So injury recovery is going to be a big one.
Yeah.
Again, I care about where I'm going to be at 10 months from now. If my max effort strength is down 10% in March, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. I'm looking at November, which means I need to be thinking about my training again mid-July.
That was going to be my next question is when is the transition going to come to start to get ready?
I start thinking about it mid-July.
Yeah.
And when I say thinking about it, I am getting back into those motions. Maybe my max effort work is down 15% from where it was before. But by the time mid-August hits, I should be pretty well into the routine. Even if the numbers aren't exactly where they were when I left off. I'm at least doing the motions with a respectable comparison of weight.
Yeah. The way I explain that, I don't like meet prep. I like there's a starting line.
Yeah.
You need to be at a certain starting line to start getting ready for the meet. Right. And during this time here, you're going to fall off of that starting line.
Right.
Right. So, but you got all this other stuff you need to work on, weak points, all that shit. But then you have to transition the training to get back to the starting line without trying to exceed too much where that starting line is,
Yes.
right? That people fuck that up though too, right? Because then they start too heavy with this false expectation. Like you could be thinking, I'm going to squat 1,300 pounds, right? And so I got to start here.
Yeah.
And then after 6 weeks, you're like, fuck.
So if we're trying to get a definitive answer here,
Yeah.
you know, how does off season change from you know, the last 3 months, 3.5 months of leading into a meet?
Yes, a transition.
Yep. So off season is going to be focused on injury recovery, conditioning work, and building up those points that will help the max effort work. So that could be plyometric. Maybe I want to work on how high I can get my box jump. And I'm talking straight leg box jump. Because I don't care how flexible my hips are. I could load up a 55-inch box and all I'm doing is measuring how mobile my hips are.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So I teach the kids this too, but when I do a box jump, I try to land with fairly locked knees. Maybe I'm not locking my knees totally, but they're straight.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I can jump to a 28-inch box and I can land with straight legs, I have 28 inches. Now, if my knees are locked or fairly close, I might bump that to 29, and then I will stay at 29 until I can get to that same point where 28 was. You know, maybe not locked, but pretty straight knees.
Mm-hmm.
And then from 29, I go to 30, 31, so on and so forth. But yeah, I can jump on a 45, a 50-inch box. Yeah, I can. But now I'm landing in a deep squat. Well, if my hips are a little less mobile that day, that decreases my box jump. Did my explosiveness go down? No, my explosiveness stayed the same, but my hip mobility went down that day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not measuring my explosiveness. I care about my explosiveness if I'm doing box jumps.
Yes.
So that's why I talk about a straight leg box jump, a straight leg landing. So off season plyometric work, lots of bodybuilding stuff, building up the rear delts, the lats, the glutes, stuff like that. Anything that I predict will reduce my risk of injury when meet prep comes along.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's tossing a ruck on and walking. I don't go very far. I'll go maybe 2.5 miles. But for powerlifting, I don't need very far.
Mm-hmm.
Josh Bryant is big on a lot of that kind of stuff too. And the stuff that Josh Bryant teaches with his tactical conditioning is absolutely applicable to injury prevention in powerlifting. It has to be implemented properly, but the methods are still pretty similar.
Yes. And when you mean implemented properly, most of the time that means not jumping straight into it.
Yeah.
1,000%. The same way you wouldn't jump straight into doing heavy singles.
Yep.
You know, in that transaction block.
So, for example, at basic training, when we have to teach the kids how to ruck, the very first thing we do, it's like within the first 2 weeks, there's typically going to be some kind of obstacle course that's about 2 miles away from the basic training land. We walk to that. And then the following week, we toss on an empty backpack. And then we walk about 3 miles with an empty backpack. And maybe I have the number slightly wrong, but somewhere in that ballpark. Then the first field exercise, we put about 20 pounds in the backpack and we walk 5 miles. Now, you can make the argument that, well, maybe we should only change one variable at a time, but we're also only working with 10 weeks. So if you're sitting at home and you want to try to get better at that, then yeah, maybe you walk 2 miles just empty, like just walk 2 miles. Then you toss on an empty backpack and walk 2 miles. Then you put 20 pounds in and walk 2 miles. Then you take the backpack off and walk 3 miles, you know, so on and so forth, just following that progression.
Yeah.
But in basic training, we're limited on the time frame. So you got to do what you got to do.
With, I don't know if I want to get into the kids or mindset. Let's just go right into mindset, because that's just kind of following the same wellness track that we're on now. With mindset, this has become a weird topic, right? Because a lot of people want us to speak about mindset, you know, because a lot of lifters are, I'll say they're all in, you know, with what that is, but that's going to be different depending upon the person. And that changes with each person too, you know, which was I think it was Phil that we had the conversation with, where at a certain time he thought he was all in, but now he realizes maybe he wasn't all in because of some of the things he was doing when he thought he was all in were counterproductive to what's actually making him better and what's not. And mindset can be very broadly defined, you know, where the thing I always throw out there, and I know you'll say the same thing, is you got to control the controllables in your life first, clean up the mess, you know, because if you clean, a lot of lifters think mindset of getting psyched to lift the bar. And that's a confidence thing to me. Like whatever you need to do to be confident to be able to do that is what you need to be able to do. But there's another level of that as well, of a focus thing, right? So you can get aggressive or whatever you want at the chalk box, get up to the bar. But at a certain point after that pick, you have to be able to process and think of what the fuck you're doing. Because if all your mind is doing is screaming rage, you can't change anything. And this is an experience thing, you know, so there's a lot of facets to it. So with yourself, I assume it starts with cleaning up the normal shit, like everything that you can control. And then as you've matured as a lifter, how has it changed from, you know, the younger age to where you're, you know, jamming whatever you have to listen to while you're driving to the gym? So you're like fucking goosebumps the whole time you're driving in there, right? So you just exhausted your adrenals before the lift even happens. Or maybe not, but as you get older and start lifting bigger weights, there becomes this point where you can't do that anymore because you need all the energy that's under the bar. You know, so what has your journey looked like with the whole thing of that?
Regarding that, I don't have anything different to say other than what's already been said 1,000 times. But I try to stay as calm and relaxed as possible. Now, before I used to I would try to take all the nose torque and, you know, put your nose in the bottle, get as amped up as possible. I have missed more lifts in competition after getting raged out on nose torque than I have made. And it didn't take me very long. Like you miss enough. It doesn't take you very long to put 2 and 2 together that maybe I don't need to get all psyched up. And I mean, I figured this out at 16 or 17. The reason why I was missing weight is because my form fell apart. All of a sudden your knees cave in real bad when you're single ply, but you're doing an equipped squat. Your knees come in, all of a sudden the gear doesn't work and you fall forward. Okay, well, that didn't work. How can I keep my knees out? Well, if I get all raged out, I'm not thinking. You're not thinking clearly. Your adrenaline is spiked through the roof. But I wasn't thinking. I wasn't focusing on what I need to. I wasn't controlling those controllables. So over the years, I have gotten more and more calm. And before the heaviest lift that I can do, you know, for the day or whatever, I get as calm as I possibly can. You know, I'm practicing the deep breathing. I'm breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth. I'm visualizing everything that I need to do. It's squeeze the lats, tuck the shoulders, drive with the triceps first, drive your head into the bench to activate the upper back. It's squeezing my glutes so my butt doesn't come off the bench. It's whatever it is, but I'm going through this checklist over and over and over. Now, before the lift, I'm going over the checklist in my head of what do I need to do during the lift, because I'm not going to be thinking during the lift. I got to get my thinking done ahead of time. Now, when I'm setting up, I have a different checklist I go over. But the checklist for the lift is done while I'm at the chalk bowl. But I have to get as calm as possible and stay as technical as possible. If I'm not technical, I'm going to miss the lift 100% of the time. That whole rage and adrenaline has never worked for me. The couple of times that I have made those lifts, they've been submaximal anyways. So it'd be like an opener or a second attempt. I always miss those third attempts where I get all raged out. So I just don't do it. It's the total opposite from what most people are, but most people also have a lot of form breakdown, and even with max effort weights, most people's form will break down a little more than mine does, that I've noticed. And I'm not saying my form is perfect. There's still a lot of things that I can dial in a little bit better, especially watching the bench from yesterday. I took that. I was happy with it, but my elbows definitely flared a little bit too early, and I had a lot of takeaways from that. For me, I got to be as technical and precise as possible. This goes back to one of the conversations that we've had. I've had it with a lot of different people, but to be technical, I define that as getting as perfect form as possible. Well, what is perfect form? Perfect form is maximizing your leverages for the physics. I mean, maximizing the physics for the leverages that you're given. Well, everybody's form is going to be different. Yeah, I get that. Not everybody's going to have the same squat stance. Not everybody's going to deadlift in the exact same stance. But when they bench, everybody's going to have the bar over their wrist, over their elbow. And if you're benching with the bar, touching your nipple line when your elbow is down by your bottom rib, you're doing a skull crusher. I'm sorry, but you're doing a skull crusher. That's not a bench press. Then you go try to correct that, and like, well, your form's different than mine. Everybody has different leverages. Well, I don't care. Like, you're doing a skull crusher.
Yeah.
A good example, which I get so much hate on. This is one of the reasons that I quit commenting on Reddit. When somebody's knees cave in on the squat, you got to look at where's the pressure going to. You go back to a physics class, and I shout out to Mr. Schneider back in freshman year physics, intro to physics. He had us write these physics force diagrams. You have a bridge. The bridge is always the example that I give. You have a bridge. It has an archway at the bottom. It's a what is it called? A straight bridge or a flat bridge or something. It has an archway at the bottom, and you put a load on top. Which direction is the force of that load going? Well, we take these arrows, and if it's a symmetrical, even archway, it's going outward at the same angle. Now, let's assume that there's some kind of deviation. There's a couple bricks that are removed from one side. Where's the weak point in that bridge? Well, that weak point is where those bricks are removed. So we can figure out now with that weak point, there's going to be a little more stress over by that weak point. More force is going to be applied to that point where the bricks are removed. If we take a hammer and a nail is a straight line. We take a hammer, we want to hit the head of the hammer square on top of the nail, on the head of the nail. So it drives straight down. But if we bend that nail and put a kink halfway through, and we still hit the head of that nail, where's the nail going to break? It's going to break halfway through. It's going to bend in half. So now we take that and we apply it to a squat. If we have our knees tracking out over our feet, that force is going over our feet and stacked over as many joints, as much surface area as possible on our body. If our knees cave in, the famous knee valgus, where's that force going? That force is now being deviated inside of our feet to the inside portion of our knee. So now you got to look at what tendons and ligaments are connecting to the inside of the knee. I don't have the all anatomy memorized, but I can tell you the area of the body where that force is going to be distributed towards. So the inside of your knee over time is going to have more degradation than if you had kept your knees out. Is a knee valgus bad? Well, it depends on how you look at it. If you want to be in the sport for 10 or 20 years, you probably don't want to put extra stress where it doesn't need to be. But if you're going to be a quick hot shot and you're going to be in and out in 3 to 5 years, go ahead and keep the knee valgus. Like that, that's fine. It's going to dig wherever you have these energy leakages. That's going to be the weak point.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to fix these weak points. You got to fix those. I mean, energy leaks. I don't know how to. I don't know.
Well,
how else to
yeah,
describe
no,
it.
I go where there's technical leakages.
Yes.
Right. And then there's also going to be physical leakages, which is what we were talking about earlier when you're looking at a max effort lift and it does something you don't want it to do.
Yep.
Right. So you got to look at that lift, and that's how you figure out weak points, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. Is there's leakage.
You have to have that eye for it.
Yes.
And your coach who has just competed one or two times and maybe they barely qualified for nationals probably hasn't developed that eye yet. And you got to look at who's the individual that you're paying $150 a month to do your training.
Yes. Well, bar path is one way to check for leakages.
Yep.
You know, and so is what your body does.
Yeah.
You know, so is this. I've been doing this for so long. It's like, to me, it's not that hard. It's like, it's pretty obvious. The only time it's very hard is with you guys. You know, when you're dealing with very tiny leakage. What you're talking about are big ones.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's kind of obvious. You know, if it's not that, it could just be falling forward on the squat or a butt wink, or, I mean, there's a lot of examples that we can give. You know, when you get up with advanced lifters, it's like, you see it, it's minor, but then you got to run through like, well, why? Right. And then that's where it can get, I love that shit, by the way. That's where it's fun.
Yeah.
Right. Because then you converse, you know, and you have, like we had over the week, you have multiple people throwing ideas out, kind of all saying the same type of thing, but trying to figure out, well, what exactly is the best place to start? Right.
So I'm going to put Phil on blast and hopefully he doesn't get offended. So
I don't think so.
No, he'll be good. I'm going to put Phil on blast here. His first time in multiply briefs. Crazy lifter, you know, arguably one of the strongest, not even arguably, one of the strongest lifters in the world right now. Lightest guy to squat 1,000 pounds raw. Squatted a grand raw, tosses on briefs, and I mean, going up is no problem, but is struggling to pick the bar, struggling to pick up the bar. Well, he's struggling because he moved his stance out about 3 to 4 inches on each side. He's now hitting his glutes and his upper hamstring in ways that have never been hit before. Yeah, he's got a lot of muscle on him. He's got this big, strong body, but it's not strong in that position. Those muscles have never been worked in that way before. So he picks up 1,000. Well, he was actually at about 800 shaking. And when I looked at him from the side, I could see that in his pick, and everybody's body is different. Everybody's not going to be prepared to do what is optimal day one, but it's something to work towards. As he's picking the bar up, his hips are behind where the bar is. So you have the bar, behind it is the hips, then you have the knees and the ankles. His knees and ankles were pretty well stacked, like good for him. But the hips were behind the bar and the knee. So now, with them not being in line, that places extra stress somewhere. Where does that stress hit? Well, a good morning is when the bar is greatly in front of your hips. His is just a little bit, but it's still the same muscle. Still the same muscle groups. So he's a low bar squatter, and he was trying to pick the bar low bar. That low bar tosses you forward a little bit further than if you were high bar. Being pitched forward is going to put more stress on that upper hamstring and those glutes during that pick. While if somebody starts shaking during the deadlift, more often than not, it's going to be a hamstring weakness, and he's shaking during the pick of the squat. It's still a hamstring weakness. Get all these exercise science majors that say, well, the hamstrings don't change their length. They don't change the length during the squat. Well, I get that, but that doesn't mean they're not working during the squat. That's another argument I've had with people. Yet you still get people that tear their hamstring during their squats, but that for some reason the hamstring doesn't work. So whatever. He was trying to pick at low bar. So then he goes to 9-something, 930, 920-ish. It was probably 940 because I doubt he made that big of a jump from second to last. Probably 940-ish. Still shaking pretty good. Got him centered. That was when I noticed that he was picking it up low bar. Then for the last set, that 1014, we moved the bar up a little bit. I just rewatched the video earlier today, actually, and it still looks like he's pretty low bar, but we placed it higher than it was before. His 940 something, he was shaking really bad, but then his 1014, he was shaking about the same as 940. So we go up 70 pounds and the shaking's about the same. Well, that means something improved. If we're increasing the weight, but that negative effect, shaking being the negative effect that we're trying to eradicate, if we go up in weight and that negative side effect hasn't increased, that means we've improved something. So now if we drop down in weight, if we go back to that 940, or if we go back to a 940 and he has that high bar, maybe that shaking disappears. I mean, it probably won't, at least not on day one, but it would at least get better. And so the takeaway is, his big thing was the bar position he was with that low bar squat in multiply equipment that was forcing him forward, placing too much stress on the hamstrings. If we move that bar up, he can sit his hips more underneath him. He can stay more stacked straight up and down. He can maintain, he'll reduce that shaking. That shaking also reduces stress on the hamstring. And this is a guy who's going to be squatting over 1,200 pounds within the next, hopefully within the next year.
Yeah.
If he's trying to deal with 1,200 pounds and he pitches forward and puts stress on that hamstring, they go pop.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're trying to avoid. We need to stack as many joints as possible. Well, we're going to start with the bar. We get the spine underneath. We want to stack all those spinal processes right over top your hips is the next joint. And then we push our hips out, or open our hips, push our femurs out. Now the knees are going to be the next one. And then we got our ankles. If they're not going to be 100% stacked, it's not going to happen. But if we can reduce the amount of deviation and keep them as stacked as possible, that is my definition of perfect form.
Yes.
At least in multiply. And then we go to raw and it's still going to be similar concepts, but the knees are going to be a little more in front.
Yes. With your high school lifters now, how do you go about starting them?
So with high school lifters, it's all going to be, well, triceps, belly, butt, lats. If they have any question, hey, what do I do? Triceps, belly, butt, lats. Depending on what day we're doing, then pick an accessory for one of those body parts. Your belly is going to be your abs, your butt's going to be your glutes. We can also add hamstrings in there. You can never train your hamstrings enough. It's always going to be one of those. Our squat day is typically going to be set up, and I don't get too creative with it. Like they're young enough, we can be doing the same thing over and over, and they're going to be getting a lot of pretty good progress out of it.
Yeah.
But I train them like they're actual athletes. I mean, it's powerlifting. You can argue how athletic many people are, but I try to train them as if they were athletes because many of these kids are 2 to 3 sport athletes anyways.
Okay.
So if they get really strong for powerlifting, they're probably going to run a little faster for track, and they're probably going to be a better football player. So
I would say they're going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll go out on a limb here.
So thankfully we go to a private school, so it's ran like a business. We don't have the taxpayer funding, but they do have the parents have tuition they have to pay for. They have to pay tuition. There is a fee to join the sport. There's other fees associated with the school, so it is ran like a business. Fortunate or unfortunate, that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
There's the school, and we also have donors. We have some businesses in the area that donate money, tax write-off, but the school gets a little bit of extra money, and every year the donors do have say where the money goes, but every year different departments get different sums of money. I was approached a few weeks ago and said, hey, we have a $4,000 sum of money. Tell me what you want to get. We had some back and forth with the school about, okay, well, I want to get this. Okay, but we only have so much space in the weight room. We got to limit how much other equipment we can get. All right, I recognize that. So I was able to pick up a safety squat bar, and we're on a budget, so everything has to be as cheap as possible. I wanted to get a little bit higher quality combo racks, but they said, nope, we already have strong arm. They were $800 when they bought them. And I think they're like $950 now or something, but they wanted as cheap as possible so that we could maximize the stuff we could get. Whereas I wanted to try to go a little more towards quality.
Yeah.
But I backed down. We just got stuff.
Yeah.
So we were able to get more combo racks to teach the kids. Also I'm kind of bouncing around everywhere here, but the training program with the kids, especially with some of the new equipment, we're going to start doing, at least the varsity team, we're going to be doing a little bit more with safety bar because we now have one. I bought cambered bar attachments, and I've never used those before, but they weren't quite what I was hoping they would be.
Yeah.
My mind wasn't thinking, and I was thinking, cool, cambered bar. We can put our hands down. We can squat with it.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
It'll mimic a cambered bar.
Mm-hmm.
Totally forgetting that it goes on the sleeves, and the sleeves are way out here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are going to be a good morning attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And our juniors and seniors actually do have some pretty good form. Like they have learned quite a bit. So I'm comfortable with them doing good mornings. I will set up their squat day, for example. We don't have to get too creative. It's going to be squats, typically an 8x3 until we get closer to a meet, and then we'll start ramping it up. It'll be a 3-rep max, sometimes a 2-rep max, sometimes a 1-rep max. Just depends on how far out from a meet we are. Unfortunately, we have 5 meets in 5 months during our season. Now, not every kid is going to be doing every meet, and our varsity team, if they qualify for state at that very first meet in December, I'm not going to tell them how to live their lives, but I recommend them not competing until March.
Mm-hmm.
I recommend them taking the whole season off from competing. You qualify, and then you go to state. That's it. But not every kid is lucky enough to qualify for state at the first meet. We'll set up the training. Typically at 8x3 is our default until it comes time to ramp up and that's for squats. And then we'll change whether it's a box squat or a free squat. Now, we're limited on our boxes, so sometimes it's a 20-inch box. We try not to use the 20-inch boxes, but sometimes 18s.
Yeah.
We have a 12-inch box. We'll just slap a rubber plate on top of it, and then it's a 14-inch box. But I try to get 14 for just about everybody. That's a safe middle ground to hit parallel. Beyond that, we will go into some kind of plyometric, typically box jumps. After box jumps, we'll do about 5 laps of heavy sleds. When I first started, I was trying to increase those number of laps, and we would do 5 laps. Then 2 weeks later, we would do 6 laps. 2 weeks later, we'll do 7 laps, up until about 8 laps. Then I realized that we're spending way too much time doing sleds and not enough time doing other stuff. So now this season, I'm going to stick with just 5 laps of sleds. I think it just gets a little redundant after five.
What's a lap?
I haven't measured it, but it's approximately 10 meters out, 10 meters back.
All right.
So we'll do sleds, squats, box jumps, sleds. Then we go into something for upper back. It was great when we had 12 kids on the team back in 2021. Last year we had 30, now we have 50. So it has grown a lot faster than what we were prepared for. So it was, all right, cool, we're doing rows this day. Now we're doing lat pull downs. Now we're doing pull-ups. I can't dictate that effectively anymore because we have too many kids for the equipment we have. Now it's do an upper back exercise. Mm-hmm. I don't care what it is. Here's your sets and your reps. Do an upper back exercise. Don't do the same thing next time we do upper back. Then I have some sort of extra accessory, and that'll change. That'll change depending on the day, but like this last week, I call them monster walks, but I thought I saw one here on the table, but we take one of those like short booty bands. Yeah. And put it around the ankle, twist the toes in slightly, and then arc with the heel doing walks, looking like you're Frankenstein. A lot of people will put the band around the knee, go into a squat, and then just sidestep. But I find that if you stand up straight and have the band more distal, point the toes in, you can really isolate those side hip flexors. I don't know if that's a glute medius or something, but you can really isolate those hip flexors, which will help keep the knees out when they squat and when they deadlift. So monster walks are usually a warm-up that I like to do for myself, but I find with these kids, doing it for a warm-up is a little bit too much, and now it turns into an actual movement. Yeah. Then I tell them to do something for abs, and then hamstring curls, 2 sets of 50, set of 75, set of 50, 1 set of 100. I vary that.
And then when's the deadlift fall in?
We lift Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday squat, Monday squat, Tuesday heavy bench, Wednesday deadlift, and then Thursday rep bench.
Okay, so do you run the bench the same way you do the squat outside of the repetition bench day, like the 8 threes?
It depends. With bench, and this is kind of comes from my training, I like working up to a heavy set and then drop down and do a couple reps. So I might have, and it's not a one size fits all. I'm not saying every week is going to be set up this way. Yeah. But more times than not, it'll be a work up to a heavy single, double, or triple, and then drop down to like a 5x3.
And you're going to base that off of what that heavy single or triple was. For example, if I'm working with a teen and it's a max effort day, and I really don't care about the max effort, I care about the sub max work. Yeah, I'll have them work up enough so I have an idea of, say, what a 70% for 5 would be, or what an 80% for 3 would be, or a 90%.
So I write down percentages for them. I find that almost nobody follows them.
Well, they're
Yeah.
no, they're not going to.
Yeah.
But I can go, work up to this minus, then that back offset is minus 25 pounds.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Now.
That way I can gauge that back down.
The percentage is usually going to be based off their 1 rep max.
Okay.
So if I say work up to a 3 rep max, and then we're going to drop down to a 5x4 at 65%.
Okay. And that's off of their
Off their 1
official.
rep.
Okay. Got it.
So that 3 rep max
Yeah.
is whatever they can do for that day. Now, sometimes it'll be a narrow grip for a max effort triple for a narrow grip, or a max effort single narrow grip. I usually like to have one day. I was doing this before with so many kids on the team. I don't know if I can do it anymore, but I would like to have at least 1 or 2 weeks in the middle of the season where we do something that's related, but not directly a bench press. So we might do we were doing 1 or 2 incline dead stop benches for a max effort triple or something. I don't know if we can do that anymore because we just have so many kids on the team, and we're limited on squat racks.
Yeah.
So
that's why I'm asking these things, because that's what most coaches have to deal with.
Yeah.
It's great when they come in and there's 10, but then when there's 50, it's like you have to be very creative with the programming as well, because you can't see all 50 at one time either.
Right.
Which is another problem.
Well, this is probably going to come out differently than the way that I intend.
Yeah.
But when you look at the competitions are going to be graded based on how the team performs. The varsity team, our juniors and seniors, are the ones that build points for the team. They're the ones. So when we grade ourselves against the other teams, we're grading our varsity versus varsity.
Yeah.
Varsity is who is going to be getting most of the attention.
Yep.
The junior varsity, the freshmen, sophomores, or first year lifters, if they want the extra attention, it's myself, a parent volunteer, and then we have a senior who came back. One of last year's seniors who came back and helped. If these younger kids want the extra help, they kind of got to ask for it. But again, it's 3 on 50.
Well, there's other things that happen with that though too, because they're going to be looking to the varsity kids on what to do.
Yep.
So they kind of indirectly become your leaders.
We actually set that. We directly set that up.
Yes.
So we have at the beginning of the season, and it kind of falls apart during the season. And I could probably enforce it a little bit better. But at the very first week of practice, we dedicated, I don't care who you are, but find your group of friends, preferably some people near the same height.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are, but I don't remember what it ended up being, but it doesn't really matter. But it was 7 sets of 6 or 7 groups of 6.
Yes.
Because that's the amount of equipment we had.
Yeah.
On squat day, that's the number of equipment that we had. Get your 7 groups of 6 and make sure that you 6 are within a couple inches of the same height. Now, from that 6, find one person who's going to be your group leader, and that person should be the most experienced with weightlifting. Now, if you're all first year lifters, if somebody worked out with their dad over summer, that's going to be the most experienced within the weight room. And we called upon the varsity team that if you see anything going on with any of the other lifters, go ahead and make that correction. Now, we're trusting that you're working to the best of your ability. And again, it's the best of their abilities. We don't expect them to have a super well-developed 2-decade eye.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't been doing it for 2 decades. But we do kind of call upon the varsity team to help fix those minor deviations when they occur within the junior varsity team. The junior varsity team, if they have a question, they come up and ask, and then we'll go over there and we'll make on-the-spot corrections.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we are walking around, we are circling, we're trying to do the best that we can, but the varsity team is the one that builds the points for the team.
Yeah.
And they're the ones whose total is tangibly the most important.
Well, there's the other thing too, though, is if the varsity team is doing what you're saying,
yes,
they're looking for the leakages. If we want to go back to the other discussion, and those other lifters, they become better lifters themselves because they can become more aware
That's the other intent. That's the other half
Yes.
of the conversation.
Yes. Yes.
I've listened to quite a few of Jocko's podcasts, and I've read his books, and I really like his philosophy on decentralized command. His big thing is whenever you have a group, and he talks about tactical environments in military leadership, but it's all the same. Whenever you have a group, you figure out who's going to be that leader, your squad leader. Within the squad, you have two different teams. Who's going to be your team leader? And those are the ones who are making the decisions for the group. Well, in this situation, we have varsity. Let's say we have 9 or 10. Let's say we have 10 kids on varsity, and then we have 40 on junior varsity. While these varsity kids aren't doing their sets, while they're sitting around waiting around, and we're limited on the number of racks, so it's usually 5 and 5, and they're right next to each other. Yeah, they sit around, they joke around with each other, they're talking. But if they look across the room and they see that, oh, this person's really not lifting good, the expectation is that they walk over there, they make a correction. And then if I see that varsity kid who walked across the room making a correction, now I'm going to be watching that junior varsity kid on their next set.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that JV kid, when they make the same mistake that the varsity kid just tried to correct, I'm going to go over there and see what I can do.
Yeah.
But it also places autonomy and a little bit of leadership on the varsity team. We've implemented team captains. So the team captains lead the warm up, and I say warm up, but everybody skips abs. So our warm up is the McGill 3 plus a glute bridge.
Yes.
So every single day, 4 days a week, for anywhere between 45 seconds to a minute, every single kid is doing the McGill 3 4 days a week.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've done something very similar to that with newer lifters that will have come in, to where their warm up will be hanging leg raises, glute ham raises,
Yep.
bent knee reverse hyper, so not loaded.
Yep.
Because I know they're not going to do those, even if they were told to do those afterwards. And if they do, great. If they do afterwards, then it will be loaded and it will be harder. But
I'm in that same boat.
At least it covers the minimum to be able to do that, and gets them in the mindset to be able to start training again.
I'm in that same boat. I started using reverse hypers as a warm up because I'm not doing them at the end.
Yeah. So it takes care of that.
Yep.
Were there any topics you wanted to go over that I didn't bring up?
I did.
Oh, you have some. Yeah.
I did have
pull some of those questions up.
I did have a series of questions.
Yeah.
Elite FTS was founded in 1998 with the aim to live, learn, and pass on. We've done this through training-related content that allows you to become the strongest athlete and coach that you can. Over the past 2 decades, actually 2.5 decades, we've published more complementary training media than anybody else in the industry. When you look at the number of articles, the Q&As, the blogs, the videos, the podcasts, there's over 1 million pages of content that we've put out there. We've been able to do this through your support of Elite FTS. So when you purchased Elite FTS strength equipment, bands, accessories, gear, apparel, or anything through the site, you directly help support the content that we put out, which in turn helps support other people on their journey of becoming stronger and better coaches. So stronger athletes and better coaches, which encompasses the aim and the vision to live, learn, and pass on. So I thank you for the support that you've been giving for the past 25 years, and encourage you to keep supporting Elite FTS into the future so we can all help more people become better and stronger. Discount code Table Talk for 10% off your first order. All right, guys, if you like the Table Talk podcast, then you're going to love the crew. If you're struggling with trying to get through a sticking point, you're trying to figure some specific aspect of your training out that you just can't dial in, you're dealing with injuries, you're trying to figure out how to better optimize your training, all the stuff you're seeing on social media is confusing, and all you need is a little guidance and support, or just somebody to look at your lifts to make sure that they're either heading in the right direction, or if there's a weak point in the lift, they can point out what that weak point is. Well, that's what we have the crew for. So when you join the crew, you get an extra Table Talk podcast each month called the Crewcast. You also get access to our Discord community, which has a training Q&A, form checks with top coaches, mindset section, nutrition, training logs, programs, over 30 ebooks, plus exclusive ebooks just for the crew, webinars, lectures, seminars, giveaways ranging from full strength equipment. We've given away many yoke bars this year. We've given away actually pieces of strength equipment as well as accessory items, and you get exclusive crew discounts. So go to the link in the description that says join the crew, click it, join now, and start getting stronger today. All right, guys, we've got a new limited edition drop, the original Mountain Dog tee that John Meadows had us design from the very beginning. So it's the first tee that he had made. Once again, this is a limited edition item. So when they're gone, they're gone. While I have your attention, you've seen me wear this one in a few podcasts to date. We've been holding back on it. This here, the 4-star tee, I think that's what we call it. It's on the website. New items, also under limited edition. Check out our shoulder saver pads. It's an easy way to do limited restricted range of motion exercises like board press that basically you just pop the pad on the bar, reduces the range of motion, pop it back off when you're done. Thank you guys for the support. Head over to elitefts.
All right. So who was that random kid that helped you at the WPO? Well, I forgot all about it and I had to message the person that asked it. It's George Purchase.
Mm-hmm.
Just putting that one out there. I
well, why are they asking that?
So after I got done with the squat, went back to go take my briefs off, and somebody ran up and just started helping pulling the briefs off. That whole day is kind of a blur. Well, George was the one that ran up and helped pull the briefs off. Never really did a real introduction. We talked a little bit, but never got his name.
It's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. No, it's
that's a good thing.
No, he was perfectly nice guy, very helpful.
Yeah.
And we had a great conversation afterwards, but I never got his name. And then I get this DM like, hey, who is the guy helping you out? Just
okay.
Just kind of joking about himself.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't put 2 and 2 together. And so he messaged me that, and I'm like, oh, sorry, I forgot.
Okay, I get it. Yep.
How do you program for a multiply prep? We kind of went over that.
Kind of covered that.
It's very situational.
Let's twist it a little bit.
Okay.
Let's say it's not you and it's somebody that's just getting into multiply, right? So how would you answer that? Like if they wanted to get into multiply, how would they go about doing it? So not the whole prep, because that would take like hours, but how would they go about it?
My suggestion would be kind of the same way how I started, was look back at what some of the programs were that Louis put in Book of Methods. I mean, it's kind of an easy answer, but Louis did the work and he wrote it down. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. He has the percentages. He has the accommodating resistance. He has the bar variation. I think it's a very good starting point. How
have you found the percentages work for you over time? When you started and over time, have you had to change them some as you've gotten stronger?
With my raw dynamic benches, I feel like my percentages need to be a little bit lighter. But at the same time, I don't know if that the extra explosiveness that you get by going lighter, I don't know how much that correlates to my max effort lifts.
Okay.
And Jimmy Cole was one that kind of, he's one of the ones that doesn't really believe in it. But his philosophy, which I'm kind of seeing a little bit, was having such light weight for the dynamic effort. And we're talking, sometimes down to 30%, depending on who you're talking to. Anywhere between 30 to 40% to start out that first 3-week wave of dynamic effort is so light that it doesn't really accommodate you to that. If you're trying to go 800 pounds and you're taking 30% of that, you might be working with 225.
That becomes a conundrum when you're talking about carryover with shirts, where with just dynamic effort in general, if you look at the lovers and the haters, right? The haters will say you can't build explosiveness past the current age, right? And I can say, you know what? Maybe I agree, but you can lose it. I mean, that's the first thing that they'll say with athletes is they lost a step, right? So if all that dynamic effort can do is to maintain it, then that's your force production coming out of the bottom. Okay. Now let's say that's still not the case. there's still more first technical reps
Yes.
than if you did 2 sets of 5.
So the carryover from being more explosive, and I'm using dynamic bench specifically, the carryover from doing a raw dynamic bench over to a max effort shirted bench, I don't see a ton of carryover with that. Personally, I don't see a ton of carryover with it. But what I do notice is just keeping some form of raw bench in does help.
Well, let me throw this out. Is there correspondence or a carryover from that dynamic bench to one of your max effort movements, like a floor press or a 2 board press that's being done raw?
I don't know.
So,
I haven't done enough of those to really know.
Yeah, that would be a thought process I would run. I get what you're saying, and I don't disagree, right? Because it's physically the way that I'll kind of put it in with people that are using gear is if I begin to see a drop off, then it will be reintroduced.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times it probably isn't going to be in there. Right. For the same reasons that you're talking about, because the carryover's gotten so much bigger. You know, I mean, if you get into the banjos where the carryovers can be even bigger, you got to really wonder, you know, it's how much is this 2 1/4?
Yep.
You know, helping with this, unless you're doing it with a Widowmaker or something like that.
Well, so that was going to be my next caveat is maybe if we do dynamic effort with a device, that might have more carryover, but I haven't done that, so I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But I do think there is some value of just doing some sort of raw benching, period. Like,
the technical efficiency.
Yes.
I mean, you still have to do that.
If that's what dynamic effort is just a way to keep some sort of raw benching in, then yes, that absolutely does work. But specifically talking about the explosiveness developed, carrying over to a max effort shirted bench, I don't see that carry over.
Yeah, I would agree.
Next one is again, we went over this. Best lifting advice for the younger generation. We kind of harped on the team quite a bit.
Yeah, but we're talking about with that, there's some caveats that you introduced, that it's a private school. They're paying to be part of the team. There's a lot of hurdles there's a lot of vetting that's already happened before they got there, right? You don't have a lot of people that are on your powerlifting team that probably just don't want to do it.
Right.
Right. So
there are some, but
where other high school strength coaches are going to be working with kids that are more deconditioned than the kids that you're working with.
And so one of the caveats that I did want to put in, because we brought up, you know, kids that don't want to be there. The school offers an after school strength and conditioning program. They bring in a coach, and he runs a 1 hour program. Immediately after that program, we have our powerlifting practice. For the kids who don't want to compete, that is a requirement. The school purchased singlets, so it's no longer an expense on the parents. There's no excuse why they can't compete. Because we've alleviated that financial barrier, it's now a requirement. They have to do at least one. For the kids who cannot commit to that one competition requirement, we push them to the strength and conditioning program. The kids and beyond that, there are still kids who say, we will do it, but then they show up to practice and they don't do a whole lot. With 50 kids, I'm going to focus on the kids that do want to be there. So if a kid wants to show up and play on their phone all the time, by all means they can do it, and they're going to be off on their own. Yeah. I'm not going to stress the kids. I would spend more time pushing the kids that don't want to be there as opposed to regulating the kids that do want to be there. Yes. But to go after that question a little bit different way, I'm under the mindset that every kid today, every kid needs some type of physical fitness or strength and conditioning in their life. Period. Yes. I mean, I want to follow up, but there's nothing to follow up with. Just period, because of the confidence. And, you know, I don't want to say, I don't like the device excuse and all this, because you can go back and say it was TV, and before there's always been something. I'm sure when newspapers came out, like, people are fucking hunched over because they're reading the newspaper. Right. They're just not active, man. They need to be active, you know, and doing something. And if it's a parent or just anybody, don't force them, but find something that they like to do. A lot of the kids who don't want to be there are forced. The parents say that you have to do a sport, and the kids see it as, well, we just got to go sit in the weight room. Now, when I say sit in the weight room, yeah, every kid is doing something.
Mhm.
Every kid is staying active. They all at least do the main lift. But when it comes time to do your set of 50 hamstring curls, maybe there might not be, I can see there's not tension on the band when they're doing the curls.
Yeah.
That
And,
kind of thing.
yeah. And to regress way back, just start them with body weight movements and walking.
Yeah. I mean,
they're probably not even walking.
We had a female who came off of some nice anorexia, and then she goes and tries to join powerlifting, and I'm like, your joints aren't big enough to get under the bar. And so we had she was a trooper. She really was. Like, she had the right mentality, and she went on and actually did pretty well. She ended up by the end of the following year, granted a 0 pound total, but she went on to have like a 430 pound total or something.
Damn.
Yeah. I mean, and she weighed 110 pounds.
Yeah.
At 5'6".
See, that can be life changing for a kid.
Yeah.
And that's
to get her started. To get her started from, just coming off of that, what looked like anorexia, to being able to perform these movements. Our first plan of attack was those monster walks, build up the hips, and then she was a trooper. She would spend 45 minutes pushing that empty sled back and forth. It was all sled work. And
that's great.
Sled work, and then we went on and did upper back work, and then push-ups.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was it. Like, there were like 4 movements, and she did them 4 days a week.
See, I like how simple that is, because I think a lot of parents and a lot of people that are trying to help kids get involved are thinking this is more complicated than it is.
And so that sounds super simple, but my way of getting there was a little more complex.
Mm-hmm.
My thought is, it's squat, bench, and deadlift, but she can't do that. So now we got to regress.
Yes.
Okay. So now we have goblet squats, dumbbell press, and maybe a dumbbell RDL. Well, she doesn't have the stability or control to do those movements. So how do we regress that even further? And that's where I came up with the sleds, the push-ups, and upper back work.
Yeah.
But it was just regressing further. And if we can't do this, we do this. If we can't do that, we do this. If we can't do this, we do that. Further and further and further back.
The key takeaway is there's always some place to start.
Yes.
And I think that's what a lot of people miss, and they just don't.
Also, and the other one was body weight box squats. We set up, it was actually a little bit above parallel. It was about a 15 or 16 inch box. And we just coached her on how to keep her knees out and sit on the box full deload and then stand back up. Because squatting is not a powerlifting movement. I mean, it is, but it's not a powerlifting movement. It's a life movement.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't squat, you can't sit on the toilet. If you can't squat, you can't tie your shoes.
Exactly. What else you got there?
Well, best lifting advice for the younger generation, it's building up those small baseline muscles. Belly, butt, lats, hamstring, triceps.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Is building up those. Your hip mobility is insane. Has it always been that way, or what did you do to build that up? Big thing for hip mobility was, well, I was learning the principles behind gaining mobility. Mobility and flexibility are 2 different things. I would do, it's counterproductive to what people say, but I would do static stretch, like a lot of static stretching before I did my sumo deadlifts. The reason for that is the static stretching would allow me to get into the position that I needed to be. And static stretching, your hip flexors, your groin, your not as much hamstrings, because that wasn't a limiting factor, but it was groin and front hip flexors for the most part. If I couldn't get into the position in the first place, what's the point in doing that movement? I'm not doing the movement I want to be doing. I'm doing something else. So I have to get myself at least closer to that mobility of where I want to be. And then I can work on that movement. The reason why they say don't do the static stretching before lifting is because you lose that stretch reflex. That stretch reflex doesn't matter if I can't do that movement in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So I would do the static stretching, open my hips up maybe an inch wider than I did before, and then I would really sit into my squat. I mean, we were watching my deadlifts.
Mm-hmm.
I would be doing those exact same movements, but maybe my feet are a little bit more narrow. Maybe my knees are more over my toes because my hips weren't that mobile. One of the stretches I would do would be kind of like an offset goblet squat. I would keep my torso perpendicular to the ground, get a wide stance, push my femurs out where I want them to be, and my feet are where I want them to be. That's my goal. It's not where they are currently. It's where do I want them to get to.
Mm-hmm.
So keep the torso upright, feet out wide, femurs tracking over the feet. And then I would have a 25-pound plate to offset. And I would squat down as deep as I could and then I would hold that plate out in front and sit further back as if you can do the same thing of just holding onto a squat rack.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of falling back, you're now holding onto that squat rack.
Yeah.
But I have a 25-pound plate, which adds resistance, pushing down deeper into that stretch.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really big one for me.
How long would you hold it?
Usually what I did back then, I don't remember. What I would recommend now is until you start cramping up. Hopefully you can get at least 20 seconds. I mean, you might start cramping up within those 20 seconds, but get to the point that you can hold it for 20 seconds. The little bit of research that I've been reading on building mobility, they typically recommend holding for 30 seconds. So I would follow more towards those guidelines, but when we're talking about a movement like this, you might not be able to.
Mm-hmm.
Like earlier this morning, I was trying to do some of those and I was starting to cramp up after about 10 or 12 seconds. Well, you start cramping up, you stand up, you get some blood flow back, you do a couple trunk rotations, get blood flow back into your hips, you do it again. The third thing I would do is I would go up to a deadlift bar before starting to deadlift, go up to a deadlift bar, get my feet where I want them to be, and push my elbows into my knees, and then slide my glutes in. I'm rounding my upper back because I'm trying to stretch I'm not trying to keep my back as a limiting factor.
Mm-hmm.
Rounding my upper back. I'm not picking up the bar. I'm using the bar, just using the bar to help pull myself into my hips.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm stretching my groin with my elbows that way, holding onto the bar.
Yeah.
Then that helps me get into the position. Then I would move my feet in about an inch or two on each side. Then I would do the same thing. Get into position, and then I would start pulling. Big thing I've noticed with building mobility is you have to attain that flexibility and then use those muscles in that new flexibility that you've just attained.
Yes.
So by sitting into that deadlift and stretching with my elbows, move my feet in, and then pick up and do a couple reps. Then I move my feet half an inch out and do the same thing. Then half an inch out, do the same thing. I'm building that mobility or building that flexibility and then using the muscles in that newly attained position.
Yes.
The other thing to it is if you build that mobility and you don't use it, I mean, you're probably going to go away once you go home.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, let's say it stays, but you haven't been using them. You haven't been training in that new mobility. Now you go load 800 pounds on a squat bar and you tear your groin.
Yeah.
You tear an adductor.
Mm-hmm.
Did you take so it's spelled wrong, but I know what he's about to say. Did you take a nose torque hit out of the flashlight?
Oh, the flashlight. Yeah.
Flashlight.
Yeah. No,
Nope.
That hasn't been here for a while. So
biggest challenges, raw and equipped. How do you navigate both? How do you navigate both? I've been kind of out of the raw world for the last 3 years. I haven't really navigated the raw world too much lately. If I were to go back, I would still keep a lot of my training the same, but focus more on that bottom end. So bench, I would do a lot more pause benches, maybe a little bit of a longer pause, just try to build up some of that power out of the bottom. I would still maintain a lot of the conjugate. There's an individual that I've been working with who's a big USAPL raw lifter, and I was coaching him for about 8 months, and we had him set up with a pretty standard conjugate kind of setup. Not exactly book of methods, but pretty close. But we took out bands for about 50% of the time. In equipment, they're probably in about 90% of the time. With him, we had him in about 50% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that worked out pretty well. You still keep the bands in, but you're favoring straight weight a little bit more.
Towards you pulling that out closer to the meat, or just in general?
Just in general, there's never a block where it's just true bands, true accommodating resistance.
Mm-hmm.
We're always going to be flip-flopping back and forth. That way you don't forget how to use straight weight.
Mm-hmm.
So it's flip-flopping back and forth all the time.
Okay.
But that would be a big one. Is I would still maintain the variety of bars. I would still maintain accommodating resistance. I would still do some box squats, but it would be the competition lift more often.
Would you bring your stance in?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who's had success raw and equipped, what's your favorite and why? Equipped. Multiply.
Why?
It's the technical aspect. Not to hate on the raw lifters, but I've heard, I don't remember who it was, but somebody was saying raw lifting is what other sports do to get better at their sport. Mm-hmm. Any football player is going to go to the gym and be a raw lifter. If you want to turn powerlifting into a sport, you have to add that technical aspect. If you don't take the time to learn the equipment, I feel like you take a lot of what powerlifting has to offer for granted. I feel like you take a lot of it for granted, because anybody can go, not anybody, but like you can go into the gym and you can hit some really crazy raw numbers. But if you don't learn the technique behind it, I feel like you don't get that mind muscle connection that you kind of need. I'm trying to think about how I want to phrase what I'm trying to say.
Well, the equipment, and I would say even single ply in today's world, it adds another element that makes the programming more complicated, right? Because you have to have enough weight to be able to touch in the shirt, which means you have to be at a certain strength to be able to even use the shirt, which is going to limit how often you can really use the shirt.
And that brings up another point. Josh Land and I were talking about this. He brought up that he might experiment with equipment at some point in time. He's not ready for it yet. He's not going to do it yet, but it's possible. And I made the comment that when I get ready for at the beginning of a training cycle, I try to figure out what is the heaviest weight that I can push and what is the lightest weight that I can touch. And that is my range. And I keep that range for that training cycle. Now you do have to go back and you got to reevaluate later on. But if I'm hitting an 804 bench, that's the heaviest I can push. But then that same day that I hit that 804, I load on 672 and it hovers. Okay, well, I'm going to go, maybe I put on 683 and I can barely get that to touch, but it does touch. I know that my range is 683 to 804. If I'm capable of pressing 804 and I can barely touch 683, 705 is probably a safe opener. But I now know that I have a 120 pound range. At the same time, if I'm touching or I'm pressing 804 and I can't even touch 750, well, that's a pretty small range. Like that's a one attempt range.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of that game.
Yes.
The other, now you got to recover from it, which is another part of the game.
Yes.
And then you still need to be strong, which is another part of the game, so there's so many gears that have to be manipulated that it's complicated, that's kind of what that I like about it is there's so many variables you got to figure out.
I find that's what makes it a sport. Now, raw powerlifting, personally, I think is boring. And coaching more raw lifters than I do, coaching more raw lifters than I ever have equipped lifters. You go to a meet, you go handle a raw lifter, their sleeves are already on. Maybe they tighten their sleeves up a little bit. They lock their belt. All right, they're standing by the chalk bowl for 3 minutes. All right, cool, good to go. There's no knee wraps. There's no pulling the straps. There's no setting the shirt. There's no prep. You just walk out there and do it. It's simple, and I don't find that fun or as fun.
Well, I've said this before, so this isn't going to be anything new that I'm saying. And with all other sports, there's people that are genetically suited for a sport.
Yes.
Right. So if you have a football player that's genetically suited for football, either visual acuity or whatever it's going to be, but they don't do their skill work, the person that does the skill work and that's in better shape, and but it just has better skill work, will beat that other person. You know, in powerlifting, if they're genetically suited, you know, for that, they're just born strong as fuck, and they're always strong as fuck. And you're not. The odds that you're going to be able to beat them is not very good. Now you add in gear, but that genetically suited person doesn't do the skill work. Now the other person who's not as genetically suited can beat that person because they did the skill work and figured out, you know, that. To me, that's what, as you said, makes it a sport.
Yep.
That's what makes it a sport, because then it doesn't just default to genetics, where I'm making this very oversimplified, because genetics alone isn't going to make somebody the strongest person in the world. We all know that.
Yeah.
But it's an equalizing factor.
And speaking of skill work, I've sat down and at least gotten a good estimate of where, this is just for a fun thing that I did, just had a little bit of spare time to kill. So I just went and looked at the WPO list. I looked at the numbers that people are hitting in equipment, and then go on their Instagram, or the best, if it's a rumor of some numbers, just figure out what people's raw lifts are, or approximate raw lifts compared to what their equipped lifts are. Out of everybody in the top 10, with the exception of James Vang, because he's a super lightweight, but he has such freakish numbers. You look at most of those people in the top 10, they would destroy my raw numbers. My raw lifts are not good. But I get a ton of carryover out of the equipment. I put the time in to learn how to get that carryover, and I train my strengths where the gear doesn't carry over.
Yes. And that's a skill that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Intelligence process, and we just talked about all this. You just don't put it on and it happens.
Right.
That's where a lot of people miss the boat here. They think they can just put it on, and then that's what they do.
A good example is the best raw bench I ever hit, and God forbid I'll say my raw numbers. I hit a 457 bench in the gym. Yesterday I hit an 849 bench in the shirt. Name anybody else who's getting 400 pounds of carryover out of their poly. There might be one or two, but you can't count many. Most people are getting 300 pounds of carryover out of their suit. You know, brief suit wraps, 300 pounds. I just squat 1113. I'm not squatting over 800 raw. I'll tell you that right now. The heaviest raw squat I hit was a 635 in sleeves. But I mean, that was unprepped. I just walked in and kind of did it. I had 3 weeks that I just worked my way up. If I did a raw prep, could I get that heavier? Absolutely. Maybe I could hit 675 or 700 in sleeves, but I've never done it. So I've looked at what other people are doing raw. Danny Tinajero had over a 2,000 pound raw total a couple years ago, but I'm still out totaling him in the equipment. I'm getting over 900 pounds of carryover out of my gear. That doesn't happen. But it's taking the time to learn how the gear works.
Well, yeah,
I mean, in those positions.
Yeah. Well, that's the important part to say, though. Not everybody can do that unless they're going to put in the work.
Yeah.
You know, and thought to be able to do it. Where I think a lot of multiply lifters could be way stronger if they learned the gear better.
Yeah.
You know, but that's that caveat, right? It's not easy. You know, that's what makes it fascinating.
For every statement, there's always an if and an and statement afterwards.
Yes.
How did you have to change to accommodate the overkill shirt? Technique specifically. The big thing I noticed with the overkill is with everything that Rudy makes, it's custom to the lifter. It's custom to the individual. So that helps. That's a big one. He goes above and beyond and will, if he's making a bencher for somebody that he's not familiar with, he will pull up their Instagram, and I can't guarantee it for everybody, but he's told me he does it for most people at least. He will pull up their Instagram and watch their bench press and see how they bench. So the shirt, you know, is going to be made for you. That doesn't mean you can toss it on. It's going to be an easy ride. It's absolutely not. In order for me to learn the red line, it took 9 months of solid training over the course of a 12-month period. Nobody's putting, if somebody can't touch their shirt, more than once or twice in a 9-month period, most people are throwing it away. But I see the carryover that people get out of it, and it told me that I needed to put the time and effort in to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching, I'm going to butcher his last name, but Tom Krajek. I was watching his lifts quite a bit. I noticed how low he was touching in his overkill. He was touching a good 3 inches lower than I was trying to. So, big technique thing is I tried touching lower. In order to touch lower, I had to get that lift off a little bit further out. In order to get that lift out a little bit further out, I needed to develop my lats. I needed my back to be strong enough to hold it. I also needed my triceps to be a little bit stronger to hold it there. I was not able to hold a decent amount of weight. I wasn't able to hold max effort weight that far out when I first put that shirt on. But getting that lower touch point and hyper tucking the elbows was a really big one.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of goes on another question that was just here. What's your philosophy on hitting depth since I bobbed so quickly out of the hole? I'm able to open up my hips so wide that the gear doesn't bind up the way that it does for other people. People who have a little bit of a narrower stance or they don't get their hips open as wide, the gear binds up a lot earlier, and mine doesn't. After APF Nationals 2022, I missed the first two. I missed it about halfway up, the squats halfway up. It wasn't a form thing. It looked more like a strength thing. Third attempt, I crank the knee wraps as tight as I possibly can, and I grind the weight up. It was like 965. I went back to the warm-up room, took the straps off, and in a canvas suit and 3-ply briefs, did a bodyweight squat down to parallel after squatting that 965. So I can now say I squatted 965 raw.
Yeah.
But since the gear doesn't bind up quite as much as it does for other people, I can just kind of squat down and come back up. For better or for worse, I mean, that's not the way that gear is supposed to work, but that's the way it does for me.
Mm-hmm.
I have to control my descent a little bit more. I have to go a little bit slower. I was trying to go quick before, but I found that when I went quick in the gear, that transition to pop back up, I would tip forward a little bit. So now I have to slow it down and control it and be more of a tempo rep. If I can control it, then I don't have as much of that rebound that tips me forward. So philosophy for hitting depth is to wait for that up call.
Yeah.
There's nothing special about the way that I do it. It's my form's dialed in, and I just have to be a little more controlled, and then I wait for the up call.
Mm-hmm.
What do I like about the Overkill products so much? They are custom to the individual. Now, other brands can make custom too, but his material does have a little bit of a stretch, believe it or not, but he designs it so that it stretches just to the point that it needs to and not any further. So if you get a really stretchy piece of equipment, say you're getting a bench shirt that stretches really far and you can just bring it down and bring it up, you might get a little bit of a pop out of it, maybe 40 pounds of pop. The Overkill equipment will only pop or will only stretch as far as it needs to for you to barely touch.
Mm-hmm.
That bar's not gonna be sinking into your chest. And if it does, your positioning is off.
Mm-hmm.
It is going to stay just enough that it grazes your bench shirt and it grazes your belly and then pops back up. Everything is made perfectly custom to the individual. Even the bench reaper, his bench device.
Mm-hmm.
He took my measurements and made a custom tool. That rubber only stretches a certain amount. And that's not very far, by the way. It only stretches a certain amount. Even his tools, even his bench device has to be custom for the individual. I think there's a huge importance of having custom equipment, especially in this game, especially in the multiply
100%,
game.
Yes.
So that's going to be the big one, but it's also the way that the gear functions. These two are going to tie together, but it, ironically enough, functions exactly the way that my body wants it to function. I've been able to develop my body to contort in the ways to synchronize with the equipment, whereas I feel like a lot of lifters try to get the gear to work for their body. The gear doesn't work for your body has to work for the gear.
Yeah.
And that's one advantage I think Phil's going to have is he's young enough that his joints are a little bit more pliable. I mean, he's a big raw lifter, but was able to open up his hips right away.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big one that people don't have. They can't open up their hips, but he was able to.
Yeah.
And then the last one is, what's the future of powerlifting? Where do you think it's going to be going? That's a really good question. I mean, with the way that raw has blown up, it's easy to say, oh, raw is going to be the way to go. But that's just judging strictly based off population. I do think that with some of the new developments coming out with the WPO, that's going to bring more attention to the WPO. Rudy's equipment just got USAPL approved. Getting a couple of those athletes in the USAPL into Rudy's equipment is going to, I mean, their numbers are going to go up. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
When you compare Rudy's Overkill single ply compared to the other brands that are being represented in the USAPL, when these lifters hop in, their numbers are going to be going up. When the people in the USAPL see how big some of these numbers get, I'd be willing to bet that there's going to be more light brought to equipment. With the developments in the WPO, I think there's going to be more people attracted to WPO style competition. More people attracted to competing in the equipment when they see that there is a very direct route to this international competition.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I haven't really thought too much about that.
Well, I would say all aspects of powerlifting will continue to keep growing.
Yeah.
Because like everything, what you see online is not real. Right. So
shocked.
Yeah. Right. So I can have raw lifters out here, gear lifters, single ply lifters, and they all get along.
Yeah.
They all support each other. And that is powerlifting at its core. It's what it gets over amplified is the differences in the drama where that, and I'm not on social as much as I used to be, but
you're not missing a whole lot.
Well, even before that, it was becoming less and less and less,
mm-hmm.
Where it seemed to be like there was always something, right? I'm not saying that it's all gone away, but there's long stretches of time where there's really nothing going on, right? It's just people lifting weights and getting stronger, and then there'll be something,
mm-hmm.
right? And then that will never go away, by the way. That's been there since my first meet in 1982. That's never going to go away, where I think that what we see in real gyms, real worlds, real meets, and all that other kind of stuff is developing this all aspects, the sport, from raw to raw with wraps and single ply, multiply. They're all just going to continue to grow. I think we'll see more people go, from raw to multiply or raw to single ply, and probably, and multiply to raw. I mean, we're seeing it now. There's people moving around between the different ones where just over the past couple years, weird conversations we're having. Like, look, if you're going to do multiply, then you probably need to just lean into it for a year or two, not just one meet. Like, give it more time to actually acclimate to it. Then if you, on the flip side, if you're going to go from multiply to raw, give it a year or a year and a half, where I think the days where you see somebody do a raw meet, then a multiply meet all within the same year, I think that's going to slowly fade away, but you're going to be seeing longer stretches in each thing, moving through that.
Well, with the prevalence of people who specialize, the prevalence of multiply only lifters, raw only lifters, the ability for people to bounce back and forth and be competitive isn't really there anymore.
No.
Or it's certainly not what it used to be.
Yes.
I mean, depending on how far back you want to go, it gets less and less specialized. People can be competitive at high levels and, I mean, arguably can be the best in multiple different disciplines. Franco Colombo is a big one. If I'm remembering right, it was him who won a powerlifting meet and then Mr. Universe, like in the same week or the same month or something. I think it was him.
Oh, there was a time Ernie France did it in the same weekend, maybe even the same day.
Yeah. And there was I don't remember who, but there was a female that did the same thing. You don't get that anymore. You certainly are not going to have a pro bodybuilder win a pro powerlifting meet in the same week. That's not going to happen.
No.
And with some of these raw numbers that are being pushed up, I mean, the raw deadlift with straps is kind of the new thing now. You're getting multiple 1,000-pound deadlifts. You could probably count about 20 or 30 different people who are deadlifting over 1,000 pounds with straps right now. There's a 132 lifter who's going around Instagram who just maximized all of his leverages, and the straps are hanging down to his fingertips, figure 8 straps, but 130 pounds and just pulled like 765 in the last couple months. Like, that stuff doesn't happen. It hasn't happened up until recently. So the future of the sport, I agree with what you're saying, that everything is going to be growing. And Raw is probably still going to stay dominant. It's the lowest barrier to entry.
Yeah.
It's going to have the highest population. Whatever has the highest population, that's where the sponsors go. If the sponsors go there, that's where the money goes. I mean, same thing forever. But I don't think equipment is going to be dropping in popularity too much.
No.
But it's not going to have 40,000 people like rod lifting does.
No. I think the percentages will kind of stay about the same.
Yep.
And
just the numbers go up.
The numbers just go up.
Yeah.
Where what hasn't happened over the years is the number of multiply lifters has kind of been the same since the 90s, where all the other things have grown. I do think we're going to see the number of single and multiply increase in percentage. It might have been, say, 40% at tops at one point. Now it's way lower than that. So I think we'll see that go up, definitely go up to what I don't know, but 20%, I can definitely see that. If you put the single ply in there, maybe even more, because there's the IPF route, that has that. So there's more in there as well, and the USAPL as well. So single ply has always been a weird one for me. It's like, if you're going to do it, just, and I never really got that.
And I don't disagree, but since it is an avenue, since it is offered, I think it would be fun to mess around with for a little bit, but I don't know if I would ever take it seriously. I might toss a single ply bench is the one that kind of intrigues me a little bit. I wouldn't mind tossing a single ply shirt on and just seeing what happens. Eventually, I don't have anything against experimenting with the unlimited. The only thing I do have against it is I look at what everybody else is doing and the amount of carryover they get in unlimited compared to poly, compared to raw. And that disgusts me. I look at, and it's not what they're doing that disgusts me. It's applying that to myself and just making a prediction. Because if I'm benching 850 in poly, and these people seem to be getting 200 pounds of carryover above their poly in these band shirts, the idea of holding 1050 in my hands, that disgusts me.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that right now.
How much fucking different is it than 850? They're
200
both gonna knock your head off.
Yeah.
I mean, so if it was to fall on your face, you think 200 pounds is gonna make that much difference? Come on.
If it's gonna kill me fast.
Oh God. Any final thoughts?
Not a ton. It's been a fantastic weekend. It's probably been one of the best weekends I've had, arguably ever. There's very few that have compared to this. What I really liked is we had a large amount of raw lifters. We had a large amount of equipped lifters. Nobody cared who was doing what. I mean, Phil kind of took the spotlight on squats. I probably took the spotlight a little bit on bench. Matt had a little bit of fun that took a little bit of a spotlight.
Yeah.
But we just had everybody working together. Everybody was helping each other out. I never even got their names, but the people who were squatting on the very end monolift by the door, they had their own little thing going on, would come over. Hey, can we get some spots? Yeah, sure. Anybody was willing to spot. Anybody was willing to help out and pull the monos. Everybody was working together cohesively. We all had our own little crews, but the crews meshed and intermingled. That's
powerlifting.
That's what powerlifting is.
Yes.
That's what it's about. And that's what I want to see. That's what selfishly, that's what I want to see where I live, where I'm at. And it hasn't happened yet, but over time, hopefully it does happen organically. We're still trying to make efforts. We're trying to bring people in where we're at. it just takes time.
What's the best way for people to get a hold of you, find you, follow you?
Instagram's the big one. I really don't do a ton with my Facebook. Yeah, I have one. I'll browse it every once in a while, but Instagram really is the big one. That's at TKinneyV 2.0.
We'll put a link in the description. So thank you for coming out.
Yeah,
this has been great, man. We're done.
I think it's good just to kind of face back and treat yourself like close to a natural athlete, so you can appreciate the diet and the training modalities and you know, rhythm and volume and intensity again. Because when you're on, you kind of lose touch with that. You know, or at least a lot of athletes, unless they're under good guidance of a coach. And even then, they have the coach to guide them, because themselves, it's very hard to do it yourself.